City of Wishes, A Cinderella Story, Episode 2, The Vampire Trap. Written by Rachel Morgan. Narrated by Ariel Delisle. Chapter 1. In the back aisle of Lunar Cherry, Vale City's best baking supply store, Elle Winter tapped her left combat boot against the floor as she scanned the shelves of unicorn-related items. "There you are," she muttered, her eyes landing on the tiny glass bottles of Lawson's unicorn tears on the top shelf. She stood on tiptoe and reached for a bottle, wincing as the partially healed cuts on her back pulled tight. The healing balm Sienna applied this morning had helped a lot, speeding up Elle's recovery with its magical properties, but the wounds wouldn't be completely gone until tomorrow or the next day. Elle lowered the unicorn tears into the basket floating beside her, then checked the note in her hand to make sure she had everything. Check, check, and check. She crumpled the paper and pushed it into her shorts pocket. But instead of moving to the checkout queue at the front of the shop, she hung out in the back aisle, pretending to examine the vast array of cookie cutters and piping nozzles as her basket followed dutifully alongside her. Dex should be here soon. She told him she only had a few minutes to talk. If she took any longer than that, Salvia would get suspicious, especially after last night. After breakfast this morning, Salvia had put a confinement charm around the entire house, telling Elle she was never allowed to leave again. But then tea time arrived, and Elle hadn't been able to bake any more of Salvia's favorite Pearl Crunch cookies because some of the ingredients were finished, and at that point Salvia decided she was too tired to go shopping herself. So she temporarily lifted the confinement charm and shoved Elle out the front door with the threat of consequences, her favorite word, if she didn't return within an hour. A squeak reached Elle's ears, and she squinted at the collection of edible glitter spray in front of her. There certainly shouldn't be anything alive among the bottles. She moved one aside to see if a mouse or some other tiny creature might be hiding back there, but all she saw were more bottles of glitter spray. She pulled the straps of her canvas bag further up her shoulder and walked forward. Another squeak greeted her, sounding suspiciously as if it came from beneath her arm. She peered into the bag and pushed aside the purse of cash Salvia had given her. Right there, between the 2 bottles of vitamin she picked up from the pharmacy next door, was the pixie she'd caught in the pantry the other day. Her pistachio shell hat sat cocked to one side of her tiny head. She gave Elle a mischievous grin and hugged one of the vitamin bottles. "What are you doing in there?" Elle hissed. "Don't you dare open that bottle. Salvia will—" "Elle?" Elle's head shot up, and she found Dex in front of her. "Oh, hi, hello." Typical, she thought. The first time they met, she was on her butt on a sidewalk. The second time, she was unconscious. Now, she was talking to her bag. She would hate to know what he really thought of her. "Everything okay?" he asked, his eyebrows rising slightly above his 2 gorgeous blue eyes. Yes, sorry, Never mind." She tugged at the end of her blonde ponytail as she decided not to mention the pixie. For some reason, she felt stupidly self-conscious about her appearance. Old shorts, a faded t-shirt, and her favorite scuffed black combat boots with cheap rhinestones sprinkled across the front. Meredith had bought them several years ago and worn them once before deciding they were too chunky for her delicate feminine tastes. Elle noticed Dex's gaze focus somewhere near said chunky boots, and for one heart-pounding moment, she feared he could see the gold chain-shaped tattoo encircling her right ankle. Her head snapped down, despite the fact that she knew her boots and socks were high enough to conceal the tattoo. She let out a quiet breath of relief as she confirmed that the symbol of the slave charm placed upon her was still hidden. She looked up and found Dex's eyes on her face again. "I know you said you don't have long to talk," he said, "but I figured we should make some plans in person instead of arranging everything by text. You never know who might intercept that kind of information." Elle lowered her hand as she looked around to see if anyone might be close enough to overhear them. "I understand." "So are you sure you want to get involved in this? It's going to be dangerous, possibly even deadly." She met Dex's eyes so he would know how serious she was. "I'm sure. I need to do this.
If it's just about the essence...
It isn't. Elle let out a long breath and decided to tell Dex what had happened. A vampire attacked my stepsister.
What? When?
Last night. One of them must have run from the fairgrounds straight to my house. My stepsister Meredith answered the door, and I guess she was stupid enough to step beyond the doorway. The vampire grabbed her, said he wouldn't let go until she invited him inside, but then my stepmother managed to pull her back, and the vampire disappeared. Dex cursed beneath his breath.
Is she okay?
She's fine. But I can't have vampires appearing at my front door again. My stepmother... Well, I just need to make sure it doesn't happen again. If it did, Salvia would punish Elle by hurting Sienna. That was Salvia's twisted way of keeping her disobedient stepdaughter and daughter in line. Dex shook his head.
It's bad news that they know where you live. Is that where that vampire caught you last night? Outside your home, as you were leaving?
No. I, used the back entrance of my house, Elle said vaguely. She didn't need Dex asking why she had to sneak out of the kitchen door, tiptoe past garbage bins, and slip through a hole in the wall into the next street over. Maybe he was waiting for me, but he wouldn't have seen me if he was out the front.
So then, maybe the attack on your stepsister was a coincidence,
Dex suggested.
Maybe it was an attempt at another random human abduction.
Elle shook her head. My stepsister is Faye. Besides, the vampire apparently said he was looking for me. Dex let out a heavy sigh. Then he frowned.
Perhaps this makes things easier. We don't have to orchestrate anything elaborate in order for them to come and get you. If they know where you live, they'll probably be waiting for you the next time you leave at night.
Ignoring the fact that simply leaving the house was going to be a problem, given Salvia's new restrictions, Elle said, Maybe, but there'll be 2 police officers stationed outside my home for the next few nights, so a vampire might not dare to come close enough.
If they're desperate enough to get their hands on you, a whole group of them might show up. They could probably take down 2 officers.
Probably. Elle crossed her arms. But I want to keep this away from my home, if possible. If I can get out safely, then maybe...
Oh, damn it.
Dex's eyes focused on something behind Elle.
Okay, we need to go. Right now.
What? Elle whirled around, her mind turning immediately to the vampire who'd abducted her. But of course it couldn't be him. It was still daytime. The only person Elle could see was a Fey woman reaching for a container of cookie cutters.
I can't let her see me,
Dex said. Elle turned back as he raised a hand and partially covered his face. He turned, hurried to the other end of the aisle, and peered around the shelf. I guess I can understand that, Elle muttered. She would have had the same response if Salvia had caught her somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. You should be able to leave without her seeing you, she whispered as she caught up to Dex. Shooting a look over her shoulder, she added, She seems completely focused on those cookie cutters.
Yes, I think... No, wait. Her husband's here too. Heading this way. Wonderful.
Dex spun around, his eyes searching behind Elle as he kept one hand up near his face. Elle looked about, hoping to see another way out of the store, but there was none. Then her eyes fell on a staircase with a staff-only sign hovering above the first step. Over here. She reached for Dex's arm and pulled him toward the stairs. They ducked beneath the floating sign, Elle glancing behind her to make sure her basket was still following, and hurried up the stairs. At the top was a room piled haphazardly with boxes and wooden crates, and at the far end, in danger of being buried beneath reams of paper, stacks of files, and numerous cables sticking out of an old computer, was a desk.
We should move out of sight of the door,
Dex said, placing one arm loosely around Elle's back. It was a casual movement he probably hadn't even thought about, but Elle flinched at the sudden pressure against her wounds. Dex snatched his arm back as if he'd been burned.
What's wrong?
Nothing. Do you think that woman saw us? She asked quickly. He frowned for a moment before turning away and crouching down at the top of the stairs.
I don't see anyone coming, and I don't hear anyone shouting at us to get out of the staff-only area, so I think we're good.
Great. Elle sat on the edge of a crate and pulled her basket closer. She was curious to know why Dex wanted to hide from a woman shopping for cookie cutters, but she had more urgent matters to discuss with him. I don't have much more time, so...
Right, yes.
Dex shifted another crate closer to Elle and sat on it. His knee was almost touching hers, which was a silly thing to notice, and yet she could barely drag her attention away from that tiny gap of space between his leg and hers.
You were saying you want to keep the vamps away from your home,
Dex said.
Which I totally understand.
Yes. Elle cleared her throat and looked up. My stepmother, she just wouldn't react well. What were you going to suggest before you realized they know where I live?
Oh, well, there's this event the night after tomorrow. One of Gisela Monroe's parties. You know, where she invites her friends of all races and tries to show the rest of the world that we can all be friends.
Elle nodded slowly. I've heard of them. Gisela Monroe was a popular Fae actress who firmly believed in the equality of all races. She held extravagant parties in her numerous homes around the world. Meredith had managed to score an invitation once or twice. Elle had obviously never been.
They're usually well attended,
Dex continued.
Anyone who's anyone likes to be seen there. Not because they agree with Gisela, necessarily, but because...
They want to be popular by association, Elle guessed. Meredith had spoken endlessly about how unsettling it was to attend parties with vampires and shapeshifters. And humans, can you believe it? And yet she bent over backwards to get herself invited.
Yeah, pretty much,
Dex said. And you think one of those vampires who tried to kidnap me will be at this party? Doesn't sound like the right kind of scene. Dex's lips curved up on one side.
I know. Gisela Monroe's vamp friends have never tasted a drop of human blood, right? Her shifter friends have never attacked anyone while in beast form. Her fae and human friends all respect and admire each other. They're all upstanding citizens of the law, aren't they?
He laughed.
I've been to a few of these parties, and I can tell you that's not the case. Gisela likes to be inclusive, which means she doesn't exactly supervise who her friends invite. It was actually at one of those parties that I first overheard a whispered discussion about the Allegiant, though I was never able to actually see the man and woman who were talking.
The Allegiant? Elle asked as her brow drew lower.
Sorry, I forget sometimes that the name hasn't been publicized anywhere. I don't know if the police even know that's what this group calls themselves. They're the ones responsible for all the recent human abductions. The abductions where no bodies have been found.
Elle clasped her hands together in her lap. Okay, so we go to this party on Friday night, and hopefully the right vampire sees me and tries to abduct me, and you and your friends get hold of him instead?
Yes. And then we'll find out what's really going on and who else is involved. We'll make sure the police know everything, and soon, hopefully, you and your family will be safe again.
Sounds so straightforward, Elle said, unable to keep the doubt from her voice.
We'll make sure nothing happens to you, but if you're not comfortable with this idea, then you don't have to.
Dex, I already said I need to do this, Elle reminded him as she stood. For my family and for the essence. And for the chance to ask that vampire exactly what he knew about her mother. Her mind kept taunting her with a vague memory of those few words he'd spoken. She tried to keep you from us. And she couldn't bring herself to believe she'd imagined the moment.
Oh, yes, the essence.
Dex stood and slid one hand inside his jacket.
3 vials a day until we catch a vamp who knows something. That's what we agreed, right?
He withdrew his hand and held 3 vials glowing gold from the vapor-like substance within. Thank you. She wasn't about to turn down the essence, but she still felt awkward taking it. She hadn't done anything to earn it yet. Let me know where to meet you on Friday, she added as she slipped the vials into the canvas bag still hanging from her shoulder. I'll figure out how to leave my house safely.
You don't want me to pick you up? That way I can make sure no vampire grabs you off the street and—
No, it's fine, she rushed to say. That, won't work. I'll ask one of the cops for a lift. He can escort me straight from the front door into his car.
Okay,
Dex said slowly, his brow furrowed once again.
I guess that should keep you safe.
Yes. Elle nodded, though she hadn't been thinking of lurking vampires when she'd mentioned leaving her house safely. Salvia and her rules and confinement charms were the bigger problem. But Elle had already begun to formulate a plan to deal with Salvia. She just had to be brave enough to execute it. Anyway, I really have to go, she said, nudging her basket back into the air as she stepped past Dex. See you on Friday. First time Salvia banished her from the dinner table.
It isn't proper for our slave to eat with us, she'd stated.
Elle had cried hot, angry tears while eating alone. These days, she was grateful for any time away from Salvia and Meredith. If she could just block out their conversation, her mealtimes would be almost perfect. Unfortunately, the door had to be left open in case Elle was needed for something. Stars forbid Meredith might have to refill her own glass, or dish her own second helping from the hot plate on the sideboard, or wipe her own darn face when she spilled gravy on her chin. Elle snickered at that last thought. If Meredith ever reached the point where she asked Elle to wipe her face, she would end up with a lot more than gravy on it. Then, of course, there would be consequences. Sienna would have to pay for Elle's disobedience. Elle sighed as she chewed slowly on a mouthful of peas. It wouldn't be worth it. The annoying pop song Meredith used as her phone's ringtone interrupted Elle's thoughts, followed by someone coughing and then a repeated smacking sound. Elle paused with her fork halfway to her mouth, but didn't move from her seat. She'd made the mistake of returning to the dining room unbidden before. If someone needed her help, they would call for her. The coughing and smacking ended. "It's Quentin," Meredith spluttered over the sound of her phone ringing. "One of Martin's friends." Goosebumps rose across Elle's arms at the mention of Martin's name. He was the target of Salvia and Meredith's most recent con. The young man Elle had been forced to use her memory-wiping ability on. "So don't answer it," Sienna said. "I have to answer it," Meredith hissed. "It'll be suspicious if I just ignore him from now on." She cleared her throat. The ringing stopped, and her voice dripped syrup as she said, "Hello?" Elle stood quietly, picked up her plate, and moved closer to the door. After angling herself so she could see Meredith through the doorway, she pierced a roast potato with her fork and nibbled on it as she watched. "Oh, yes, Quentin. Hi. How are you?" Meredith smiled her flirty smile and dragged her hand through her shiny red hair, as if Quentin were in the room and could be seduced by her charms. "Oh my goodness, really? And he doesn't know how he ended up there?" Meredith lowered her hand, an expression of fake horror encompassing her features. "He doesn't remember me, either? Well, I mean, we weren't together for very long, so it's not as though— Wait, he was what?" Her tone climbed a few notches. "Propose? Are you sure?" Another moment passed as she listened. Salvia and Sienna watched her in silence. "I think you've got that wrong. I mean, we really weren't— My idea? He said I wanted to get married?" Meredith laughed. "No way. I am not ready for that. If Martin told you anything about marriage, it was totally his idea. And he— Oh, wow, his grandmother's ring?" She gasped, placing a hand over her mouth. "Oh, no. He must have been robbed." Elle almost rolled her eyes. Of course poor Martin had been robbed. Meredith was the one who'd done it. "Well, yes, I could come to the hospital and see if it sparks his memory. But, I mean, the last time I saw him We actually ended things, so even if he does remember me, I'm not sure he'd be happy to see." She played with her fork, listening for another few moments. "Yes, certainly. I can come through tomorrow morning. I'll see you then." She ended the call and let out a groan.
"I assume someone found Martin behind that bar," Salvia said.
"Yes, and now he's in the hospital with no memory of the past 3 months. His stupid friends think maybe it'll help if he sees me." Meredith dropped her phone on the table and let out a dramatic sigh. "This is why we don't do this sort of con very often. We have to get too involved in a person's life. Too many other people to deal with afterwards."
"It'll be fine," Salvia assured her.
"Elle!"
she shouted, and Elle took a hasty step backward before anyone noticed her watching through the doorway. "More roast beef and gravy," Salvia called. Elle lowered her plate to the kitchen table before hurrying into the dining room. With the aid of an oven mitt, she lifted the platter of roast beef from the hot tray and brought it to Salvia's side. "I know it'll be fine," Meredith said as Salvia used her magic to transfer a few pieces of meat onto her plate. "Martin won't remember me, and I can explain the rest away. I'll tell his friends that he became obsessive after I tried to break up with him. He insisted we were meant to be together, and that's why he was telling people stories about proposing to me." "Sounds good," Salvia said.
"And the gravy, Elle," she added with a snap of her fingers. "How many times do I have to ask?" "My point, Mom," Meredith continued as Elle returned the platter to the hot tray and grabbed the small gravy jug, "is that we need to let enough time pass before we do this particular con again. People will grow suspicious if too many young men end up losing their memories after telling their friends and families they're about to propose to Meredith LaRue."
"Of course, and that's why we have a different one lined up for—"
"That's enough, Elle.
My goodness, do you want to drown my plate?"
"I'm sorry," Elle muttered, stepping away quickly as she imagined drowning Salvia instead. Another con already?" Meredith complained. "But we just finished one. Can't I have a break?"
"Actually, I was thinking Sienna could do this one."
Sienna's hand jerked, knocking her knife to the floor. She bent hastily to retrieve it. What was that?" she asked as she straightened.
"It's about time you started adding to the income of this household."
"But
There's that nice exchange student who's taken a liking to you. Elon, is it? He's related to the royal family on that tiny little island he comes from, correct?"
By marriage, I think," Sienna said faintly.
"Same thing,"
Salvia said.
"My research tells me he comes from a very wealthy family. I'm sure you can steal something of value from him."
Sienna's grip tightened on her knife. Elle shook her head, hoping Sienna would notice. "Don't argue now," she wanted to tell her. "Salvia won't listen. We can come up with a way to avoid this later." Sienna's eyes flicked toward Elle before returning to her plate. She cleared her throat. Of course. Just let me know what I need to do." "Ha, what a joke," Meredith retorted. "I'm sure he'll see right through you."
"Meredith, that isn't very supportive of you,"
Salvia said, but her lips were turned up in an amused smile. Sienna opened her mouth, clamped it shut, then opened it again. "Elle, can you please get me some more juice? And I think I need more gravy. And another roast potato. They're so delicious." Elle nodded and returned to the sideboard, recognizing Sienna's numerous requests for what they were. A plea to not be left alone right now with her horrid mother and sister. "Oh, my stars! I know what I can wish for!" Meredith exclaimed, slapping her hand down on the table. "You know, with the wish Martin gave me." With a pitcher of juice in her hand, Elle turned in time to see Meredith leaning forward with a crazed gleam in her eyes. It's so simple. I don't know why I didn't think of it before. I'll wish, wait for it, for the prince to marry me. Don't be silly, Sienna said immediately. You can't wish for love. It's one of the impossible wishes. Everyone knows that. I'm not wishing for love, idiot. I'm wishing for marriage. There's a difference. It's only a first-tier wish, Sienna reminded her as Elle topped her glass up. I doubt it can grant you a marriage. I may as well try, right? Right, Mom?
Actually, Salvia said, I took the wish to Apollo's apothecary yesterday.
Meredith's jaw almost hit her plate. What?
Calm down, darling. I haven't actually sold it yet. We don't have an authentication certificate for it, so someone needs to examine it and make sure it's legitimate, not some low-grade black market wish. I'll hear from them once the authentication is complete and they offer me a price. I can still back out if I change my mind.
Thank goodness for that. Meredith pressed a hand dramatically to her chest as she sighed. Elle made a superb effort at keeping her eyeballs pointed forward instead of rolling them toward the ceiling. She moved to the sideboard and swapped the juice pitcher for the gravy jug and the dish of potatoes.
But remember, Meredith,
Salvia added,
that we decided the wish would be worth more to us if we sell it.
Not if I wish for the prince to marry me and it actually works, Meredith retorted.
Yes, well,
Salvia trailed off while Sienna took her time choosing a single roast potato from the dish. Elle watched Salvia carefully, wondering if she might actually be considering Meredith's preposterous idea. What? Meredith demanded.
I'm thinking,
Salvia said. Elle remained motionless, dread settling in the pit of her stomach. Sienna took the gravy jug from her and poured it ever so slowly over the potato sitting at the center of her plate. Across the table, Salvia rubbed her chin.
Yes, we need a plan.
She refocused on Meredith.
Some of those dressmakers I contacted will be here over the next few days to measure you and show us samples and give us quotes. And you've been reading every article I sent you about the prince, I hope?
Of course.
We need to... Elle, why are you standing there gawking? You're not needed right now. Put those things down and return to the kitchen.
Elle replaced the dish and jug on the hot plate without a word.
We need to put all the pieces together and devise a solid plan,
Salvia continued.
Something that has a real chance of working. Then, if we can word it properly, it might be worth wishing for something like the prince asking you to marry him.
Sienna's knife clattered to the floor a second time.
Oh, for goodness sake, Salvia snapped. Do you have to be so clumsy?
Sorry, Sienna muttered, reaching down at the same moment Elle crouched to retrieve the knife. We can't let her make that wish, Sienna whispered. Neither of us will ever be free if this family ends up stuck behind palace walls. I know, Elle whispered back. Then she raised her voice and added, Wow, that knife really fell far. Though the offending piece of cutlery was already in her hand, she crawled a little further under the table. Okay, got it. Here you go. She reversed and handed it to Sienna. Thanks so much, Elle, Sienna said, straightening and brushing her wispy hair out of her face. Anytime, Elle answered, climbing to her feet. She returned to the kitchen, to her plate of food that was now cold, while behind her, Salvia muttered something about being surrounded by circus folk. Chapter 3. Later that night, after Elle had finished cleaning the kitchen, she hovered outside the lounge where Salvia was reclining with her laptop, probably searching for more dress ideas for Meredith, or reading the latest gossip about Prince Chevalier. Bothering her stepmother after dinner was a risky move, but Elle had to do this before she chickened out. She took a deep breath and knocked on the lounge door. Salvia's head appeared around the side of her favorite white linen wingback chair.
"What?"
she snapped. Elle placed her shaking hands behind her back and walked into the room. She stopped in front of Salvia's chair, her eyes landing on the little side table. On it sat a plate with a pearl crunch cookie and the shimmering crumbs that remained from the one Salvia must have already eaten. Elle had baked a batch this afternoon before starting dinner. White chocolate chips and chopped nuts gave the cookies their crunch, while the unicorn tears gave them their pearlescent sheen. They were delicious, and if Elle ever wanted one, she had to sneak it off the baking tray soon after the batch came out of the oven. Once the cookies were packed away in a jar, Salvia kept count of how many were left. "I'm sorry for disturbing you," Elle said, looking up from the plate. "But there's something I want to talk to you about."
"You're supposed to be in your room now,"
Salvia said.
"It's almost 9:30. You know the kind of pain you'll have to suffer if you're not inside that room at the right time."
"I know," Elle said, her mind going to the slave charm tattoo on her right ankle. Salvia had adjusted the confinement charm on Elle's attic so it would seal her inside at 9:30 instead of midnight. That was long enough, she told Elle, for her to finish cleaning the kitchen and dining room after dinner. If she was a moment too late, however, well, she'd felt the searing agony once before when she accidentally fell asleep in Sienna's bedroom and didn't make it into the attic in time. She had no desire to experience that pain again. "But this is important," she said, "and it won't take long. I'll be back in the attic before it's too late."
"Important?" Salvia asked. "Really?"
She placed her laptop on a side table, tucked a strand of glossy red hair behind one ear, and interlaced her hands in her lap.
"It had better be very important indeed. If you end up boring me with something insignificant, Sienna might have to suffer the consequences."
Elle's jaw tensed. Sometimes she hated her stepmother so much she could taste it. But losing her temper now would only cause pain for Sienna. "There's something you and I both want," she said carefully. Salvia raised an eyebrow.
"Is there now?"
"We don't want any vampires to show up at this house ever again."
"I told you."
"It's my fault. I know. So I need to make sure it doesn't happen again. If you let me out at night, I can deal with the problem. It shouldn't take more than about a week, and then we never—"
"No,"
Salvia said immediately. "Just listen."
"Absolutely not. You want me to let you out at night to go and meet vampires who'll probably end up killing you? Who will help me cover up the evidence of our cons if you're dead?"
Elle exhaled slowly. She'd prepared for this argument.
"You don't actually need me for your cons.
I know I make it easier.
But you and Meredith are good enough to con people without me taking their memories."
It was dangerous to play the flattery card, but she spoke her words with an edge of bitterness, as if she were grudgingly admitting the truth rather than buttering up her stepmother.
"Well, I suppose that's true, but that doesn't mean I have to let you go anywhere. The police will catch the vampire who was here last night. They can make the problem go away."
"Can they really?" Elle asked. "There are many problems in this city that the police haven't managed to get rid of. And in a few days, they won't be patrolling our street anymore. They'll have new problems to deal with. What if vampires come back then and force their way into this house?"
"Not possible without an invitation."
"But you can't hide inside forever. What if they catch you or Meredith while you're leaving or returning home at night? What if they threaten to kill you if you don't invite them in? And what if you do let them in and they kill you anyway once they've got me? I know I'm not worth that much to you. I know you wouldn't risk Meredith's life just to keep me." Salvia's eyebrows lowered.
"You're playing a dangerous game, Estelle."
"I promise I'm not. I don't know what these vampires hope to get from me, but I want to be rid of them as much as you do. All I'm asking for is a chance to go out, somewhere far from this house, and deal with them."
"Deal with them,"
Salvia repeated with a snort.
"You're hilarious. How could you possibly deal with them?"
Maybe I can take their memories. It doesn't matter how I deal with them as long as they don't return. And if something happens to me, well, she lifted her shoulders. You'll have lost me, but at least you'll be free of the threat of vampires. You and Meredith and Sienna will be safe. Salvia cocked her head to the side. Tell me what you've really been up to all the times you've snuck out of this house, and perhaps I'll consider granting your request. Elle took a deep breath and decided to go with a version of the truth. I met someone. A human? A fairy? Salvia laughed. What terrible taste he has. Elle lifted her chin. He doesn't care that I'm human. Is that so? Salvia arched an eyebrow. And does he care that you're a slave? At that, Elle remained quiet. She could have lied, but Salvia probably would have seen right through her. Salvia shook her head slowly and made a tisk-tisk sound. Keeping secrets from him already. What an unhealthy start to your first relationship. Again, Elle remained silent. Fine, Salvia said. I'll let you go out and deal with this. You have 1 week in which to make it happen, and you still have a curfew. I'll adjust the confinement charm so it's back to midnight as before. You don't need to be out any later than that. Don't argue with me, she added, raising her index finger as Elle opened her mouth. This is the most freedom I've ever given you. You damn well better use it to get rid of that vampire. Or vampires, plural, instead of hanging out with your fairy boyfriend. She spat out the last word as if it tasted bad. Don't worry, Elle said quietly. I won't be seeing him again once this is done. You most certainly will not. You won't leave the house at night ever again once this is done. Elle nodded and, without another word, stepped away. But Salvia stuck her arm out to stop her. Remember the consequences if this doesn't work. I'm fully aware of the consequences, Elle said bitterly. You'll hurt your own daughter if I fail. Salvia pulled her hand back and laid it in her lap. You see my actions only as a punishment. Don't you realize I'm doing her a favor as well? A favor? The world is a cruel place. If I don't teach her that at home, she might not learn this important lesson until it's too late. Do you really have to beat her in order to get the message across? Elle demanded. A second later, she wished she'd held her tongue. That was exactly the sort of comment that would end with Sienna getting hurt. But instead of retaliating, Salvia simply let out a weary sigh. You don't have to be so dramatic about everything. Sienna will be fine. My father beat me when I was young, and it only made me stronger. I'm doing the same for her. Now go. You're wearing down my patience. Elle almost asked why Salvia wasn't teaching Meredith the same lesson, but she'd pushed her luck far enough tonight. Best to keep her mouth shut and return to her attic before she found herself locked out by the confinement charm. Chapter 4. On Friday night, Officer Cole brought his car to a stop outside the restaurant Elle had asked him to drive her to. She leaned forward in the passenger seat and checked the restaurant name before her eyes slid down and landed on Dex's car parked just ahead of them.
Is this the right place?
Officer Cole asked. Yes, thank you so much. Elle reached for the passenger door handle. I really appreciate the lift.
Well, your mom asked so nicely,
Officer Cole said with a goofy grin.
I couldn't exactly say no.
Elle forced a smile onto her lips and decided not to correct him on the mom part. Yes, she can be very persuasive.
Right, so she said I should pick you up at 11:30?
He said. That's right. Thank you. She had to go somewhere tonight, so she isn't able to pick me up herself. Not that Salvia would ever have gone out of her way to fetch Elle from anywhere, even if she wasn't busy.
All righty. See you then.
Elle climbed out of the car and crossed the road. She opened the front passenger door to find Dex talking to someone on speakerphone.
"Worry every time that someone will recognize us,"
a voice said as Elle bent and slid onto the seat. It sounded like Dex's friend, Ollie.
"You worry too much,"
came a second voice through the phone. Probably Xander.
"It's not healthy. My worry is completely founded. What if— Okay, I need to go,"
Dex said.
"Elle's here. Make sure you keep your eyes peeled for any of our unpleasant friends. We'll be there soon."
He ended the call and looked up.
"Hi."
"Hi," Elle answered, unable to look away from his gaze. It was ridiculous the way his eyes took her breath away. She really had to get that under control. She forced herself to turn and pull the car door shut. Do I look okay for tonight? I mean, will I fit in? I'm not exactly familiar with celebrity parties."
"Yeah, you look good."
"Okay. Thanks." Elle rubbed her hands self-consciously over her legs. She was wearing one of the outfits Salvia kept aside for the occasions Elle had to pretend she was a normal part of the family while helping out with a con. A flared, high-waisted skirt that ended just above her knees and a cute polka-dot blouse, plus her combat boots. Meredith had remarked loudly about how the boots completely ruined the outfit, but there was something about them that Elle found comforting. Besides, she thought they added a bit of attitude to the whole look. Far more interesting than if she'd gone with stockings and flats. But she'd kept that thought to herself as she walked out of the house with Salvia and Meredith's eyeballs burning holes into her back. Leaving with permission wasn't nearly as pleasant as sneaking out. Elle reached for the chain at her neck and pulled her pocket watch necklace out from beneath the blouse. It was safe to show it off now that Salvia wasn't around. It probably didn't go with the outfit either, but Elle drew as much comfort from it as she drew from her familiar boots.
"I like that,"
Dex said as the car rumbled to life.
"The necklace, I mean? I don't think I told you that the other night."
"Oh, thank you. It belonged to my father." Why had she said that? She'd never felt the need to tell anyone that before.
"Cool."
Dex pulled into the street and drove away from the restaurant.
"And you mentioned a stepsister?"
"Yes."
"So one of your parents remarried? Or both?"
"My father." Elle twisted her hands in her lap. This was new territory for her, talking about her family with a client. Then again, Dex wasn't like her other clients. He'd saved her from a vampire abduction, and now he was hunting them with her help. He might be paying her essence the way her clients did, but he was more of an accomplice than anything else. Besides, part of her wanted to share more of her story with him. She never got to share anything with anyone else. He remarried when I was 7, but then, he died when I was 12.
"Oh, wow. I'm so sorry."
Dex shot a look at her before returning his gaze to the road. He raised one hand and rubbed the back of his neck.
"So now you live with your stepmother and stepsister?"
2 stepsisters. Meredith is horrible. She was the one silly enough to step outside the house and let a vampire grab hold of her. But Sienna's amazing. She feels more like a real sister. Elle shifted slightly to face Dex. "Do you have siblings?"
"Oh, no. Unfortunately not. It's just me." "So does your mother live far away?"
he asked before Elle could comment on him being an only child.
"Is that why you live with your stepfamily?"
Elle turned her eyes toward the windshield. Streetlights and flashing billboards zipped by. "My mom isn't alive either."
"Oh, jeez, I'm an idiot. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't be asking you all this personal stuff. Do you want to talk about the weather? That's probably a lot safer."
Elle laughed. "And a lot more boring, too." She shook her head. "It's okay. I mean, it's not okay. I still miss my parents every single day. What I mean is, I don't mind you asking."
"Okay. Well, I'm really sorry you lost both of them. I can't imagine what that's like. And,
He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel.
so it's a great evening for a party, right?"
Elle chuckled. Yes, such lovely weather.
Amazing weather.
Elle pressed her lips together, trying to keep her smile from growing. This conversation is deteriorating quickly.
I know, I'm sorry.
Dex said with a groan. So where is this party happening? Elle asked. That seemed like a topic that was both safe and relevant.
Gisela Monroe's house, in the Arabesque Hills.
Okay. I wonder if it has a good view of the palace. The Arabesque Hills, home to some of the most lavish estates on the outskirts of Vale City, weren't too far from Sovereign Hill, where Belmont Palace sat in all its glittering glory. Elle's old home had been situated somewhere amid those rolling hills. One of the smallest properties in the area, but still sprawling compared to the townhouse she lived in now. It had belonged to Salvia's first husband before Salvia inherited it.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure.
Dex said.
Anyway, we need to stop somewhere first so I can pick up something. Sorry about that. I forgot I needed this thing. But it'll be quick. Do you know Apollo's apothecary?
Yes, but it's closed at night, isn't it?
It is, but we'll be going onto the roof.
Oh. Elle tried to picture the roof of Apollo's apothecary, but all she saw in her mind's eye was the domed glass top. Do you mean the greenhouse? She asked. Isn't that part of the apothecary?
Yes, but we'll be able to get in.
Dex offered no other explanation. The car moved speedily toward the upmarket part of town, and Dex made idle conversation about the landmarks they passed. Clearly, he was too scared to venture anywhere near personal territory again.
Okay, we're here,
he said, bringing the car to a stop and cutting the ignition. He looked around, and Elle noted that the street was empty.
I don't want to leave you alone in the car,
Dex said.
It might not be safe.
I'll be fine, Elle told him. I think I'll be fine, she added as the thought of a bunch of vampires all trying to break into the car at once came to mind. How strong are vampires again?
Just come with me. It won't take long. We'll go up to the roof, get the parcel that's waiting for me, and come straight back down.
Elle raised an eyebrow. A parcel? How mysterious.
It's just a medicinal thing I forgot to pick up earlier.
He climbed out of the car and hurried around to her side, opening the passenger door before she'd finished unbuckling her seatbelt. She noticed the gold dust glimmering at his fingertips. Ready to throw some magic at someone? She joked.
Gotta be prepared when there might be vamps hanging around. I assured you I wouldn't let anything happen to you, didn't I?
Elle nodded. True. Can't go back on your word now.
I don't intend to.
Chapter 5. Dex's heart thumped a little too fast as he and Elle climbed the spiral staircase attached to the outside of Apollo's apothecary. What the hell was wrong with him? He was normally so composed, so confident, and here he was making a complete idiot of himself in front of her. Chatting with strangers usually came easily to him, perhaps because he knew it was unlikely he'd see any of them a second time. There was no pressure to impress anyone. Not that there was any pressure to impress Elle. Was there? There shouldn't be, he reminded himself. And what was he doing asking her about family? What a stupid move. Aside from hurting her by bringing up painful memories, asking about her family left the door open for her to ask about his family, and he certainly couldn't go down that road. He should have kept things strictly non-personal.
You can't get too close to her,
Xander had reminded him earlier this evening. Dex was aware of that, and he'd said as much, but Xander still gave him that look that said, I know you, don't be an idiot. Dex had to admit that Xander was probably right. He'd already crossed a line with Elle. He'd made a blood oath with her, for goodness sake. How many other strangers had he done that with? Precisely 0. I think it's locked, Elle said, and Dex realized she was trying the door at the top of the stairs.
Let me,
he said, reaching around her. He placed his hand over the lock and uttered the charm Cress had given him. Something clicked, and when Elle turned the handle again, the door opened. They stepped inside, and he heard Elle's quiet intake of breath as she looked around. Plants and flowers of all sizes, shapes, and colors filled the circular space, separated by a few winding paved paths. White stone statues were visible here and there, and a fountain with water spilling over the edges of its 3 tiers sat at the center of the greenhouse. The domed glass roof let in some light from the moon and streetlights, but most of the illumination came from the numerous small lights placed among the plants at floor level. Dex left Elle to admire the magnificent purple blossoms of a clem fever bush, while he headed for the Pegasus statue between the phoenix leaf trees on the right. He bent down and reached behind the statue, expecting to feel a small paper-wrapped parcel. When his hand found nothing, he leaned further to the side and looked behind the statue. There was nothing there.
Damn it,
he muttered. Straightening, he brushed the sand from his hands and looked around. Is something wrong? Elle asked.
It's supposed to be behind this statue here, but I can't find it.
Can I help you look? How big is this parcel?
It should fit in your hand, wrapped in brown paper.
Okay, Holy stars! Elle breathed. Dex looked up in time to see a large winged shape swooping overhead. Am I imagining things? She asked. Or was that a dragon? Dex swallowed.
That was a dragon.
He took a deep breath and resisted the urge to grab Elle's hand and run back down the stairs. He couldn't leave here without the Asterleaf potion. Besides, maybe the dragon that had flown past wasn't the dragon he was thinking of. Unlikely, his brain reminded him. There weren't exactly loads of dragon shifters around. Elle rushed to the edge of the greenhouse and pushed a fern aside as she looked down. It landed in the street in front of the apothecary, but I can't see it anymore. This is so crazy. I've never seen one so close before.
They're just people, you know,
Dex reminded her, smiling a little at her awe. I know. I'm sorry. I'm sure they don't want to be gawked at by other races. I just think they're so cool. She turned away from the glass, scooping her hair behind one ear. Sorry, we're supposed to be looking for your parcel. Can we check behind all the other statues? Maybe you just got the wrong...
Dex, you're here,
a female voice said. Elle whipped around just as Dex turned to face the door and the woman with sleek purple hair.
And you brought a friend,
she added, her eyes moving to Elle.
A new friend,
Dex said, hoping Cress would catch his meaning. A new friend who doesn't know anything about me, he would have said if Elle wasn't within earshot.
This is Elle,
he added, moving closer to her.
Elle, this is Cressida.
Call me Cress, Cress said, crossing the greenhouse and holding her hand out toward Elle. Gold bangles jangled on her arm. Hi, Elle said, grasping Cress's hand and shaking it. Wait, was that you? The dragon. I saw it fly overhead and then it landed in the street in front of the apothecary. Cress seemed to examine Elle for several moments before answering.
Yes, that was me.
She smiled.
You look shocked, honey. Are you okay?
I've just never met a dragon shifter before. And I thought you were Fae. Your ears... She trailed off.
I was born Fae, Cress explained. Bitten when I was young. There aren't many of us dragon shifters in Vale City, born or bitten, so I'm not surprised you haven't met any.
Her eyes turned to Dex.
You look a little uncomfortable too, Dex, she added with a knowing smile.
He let out a sharp breath.
I just didn't expect you to be here, that's all.
Right. I'm sure that's it. Cress's eyes moved to Elle, then back to him. She smiled.
Don't worry, I'm not in the business of sharing other people's secrets.
Dex's brows pulled lower over his eyes. Was it really necessary to say that? He would have demanded if he'd been alone here with Cress. Then he noticed the way Elle's eyes widened, and suddenly he wondered if Cress might have meant her instead of him. Or had she been referring to both of them?
"Have the two of you met before?"
He asked. "She's come into the apothecary," Cress said, at which point Elle's lips pressed together and her cheeks turned pink. "Anyway, I need to speak with you, Dex. That's why I'm here." Right. The Aster-leaf potion. He'd been so scared Cress might say something she shouldn't that he'd almost forgotten about it.
"I looked behind the Pegasus statue, but—"
"It's not there. I know. Come, let's talk." She ushered him to the far side of the greenhouse, and Elle, clearly polite enough to understand that Cress wanted to talk in private, didn't follow. She might still be able to overhear them, but hopefully Cress wouldn't give away anything too important. "I'm afraid I couldn't get any Shadowbane to finish the potion," Cress explained. "I went looking again now, which is why I didn't call you, but the plants are all bare. It's the wrong time of month for the flowers to bloom."
"Shadowbane. Is that an important ingredient?"
"It's vital. Aster-leaf is the major component, hence the potion's name, but it's ineffective without Shadowbane." Dex felt invisible ropes tighten around his chest.
"But this is urgent. I don't have any potion left."
"I'm sorry, Dex, but you didn't give me much notice."
"I know, I'm sorry. I've been distracted with all this vampire business. I didn't realize I was almost out. How long do you think it'll be before you can get this Shadowbane?"
"I'll look again tomorrow, just in case some of the plants bloom early, but it could be another 4 or 5 days. I'll let you know as soon as I've got some." Dex let out a long sigh.
"Okay, thanks. I guess I can't ask for more than that."
"Will you be okay? Perhaps you should stay home until I can get more for you." Dex looked across the greenhouse at Elle. If something went wrong tonight at the party... He shook his head, banishing the thought.
"I'll be fine. I had the last few drops this morning. That should keep me going."
"For how long?"
"I don't know. Tonight at the very least. Hopefully longer. But I'll be fine. Xander and Ollie are always nearby."
After a pause, Cress nodded. Her bangles clinked as she patted his arm. Dex looked past a giant-leafed pixie catcher to where Elle was standing, her arms crossed over her chest as she faced away from him and Cress.
"I guess we should get to that party then,"
he called out to her. She looked over her shoulder with a kind of innocent expression that probably meant she'd heard every word he and Cress had spoken. "Ready when you are." They returned to the car, and Dex spent the entire ride to the Arabesque Hills waiting for Elle to ask what Cress had meant by keeping other people's secrets. But she didn't bring it up once. Which, he supposed, made sense if she had her own secret to hide. He certainly wasn't about to ask, though. He had too many of his own to worry about. Chapter 6. By the time Dex's car drove below an impressive arched entrance, past a security check, and up a long driveway lined with tall trees, Elle had recovered from her shock at seeing Cress on the roof of Apollo's apothecary. She'd been terrified Cress would say something about her being a slave. Though it was rude to eavesdrop, she'd held her breath and tried to listen in on as much of their conversation as she could. She didn't hear everything, but Dex hadn't looked at her with horror or revulsion at any point, so that was a good sign. If Cress had told him the truth, he probably would have run a mile by now, abandoning her and his car and their vampire hunting plans. It was one thing to hang out with a human, but to spend time with a slave? People didn't do that. The only reason Sienna's friends occasionally put up with Elle's company, when Elle actually spent an evening with them instead of sneaking off to meet clients, was because Sienna always reminded them that Elle was, first and foremost, family. They'd probably be relieved when they found out she was never allowed to leave the house again with Sienna. Dex followed the driveway around a huge fountain and parked alongside a row of flashy vehicles. All Elle could do once she was out of the car was stare. The magnificent mansion rose up before her, all clean wide angles and huge glass windows and cleverly placed exterior lighting. It put Fernvale, her old home in this area, to shame.
Ready?
Dex asked. Elle pulled her gaze from the palatial home. For an attempted abduction? Sure, anytime.
Emphasis on attempted,
Dex said.
We won't let anything happen to you.
I know. They walked toward the entrance together, and Elle wondered if this was what life was like for normal girls. Not the celebrity mansion part, but the part where it was Friday night and she was walking into a party with a handsome date beside her. This is not a date, she reminded herself. Dex wasn't here to hang out with her. He was here to catch vampires. But for someone who spent most of her time either locked in an attic or doing her stepmother's bidding, this was probably as close to a date as she was likely to get. May as well pretend for a few moments before she had to start worrying about vampires pouncing on her.
Message from Xander,
Dex said, looking at his phone.
He's seen someone he might recognize from the fairground the other night, but Ollie isn't sure he agrees.
Well, I guess I just need to hang out near this person and see what happens.
He says the vamp is currently on the deck overlooking the pool, chatting with a...
Dex frowned at his phone.
Pretty sure that's meant to be Fey woman, not Fell woman. Anyway.
He returned his phone to his pocket.
We can head that way.
Inside the grand entrance hall of Gisella's home, people mingled around a marble sculpture of a naked woman reaching up to touch the 2-story-high ceiling. Among the many unfamiliar faces were plenty Elle recognized. Models, actors, singers, social media personalities. She almost pinched herself to check she wasn't dreaming. A little further inside, where the lights were dimmer and the music was louder, people hung out in groups or pairs. They stuck their straws into the different colored bubbles of drinks that floated around, or grabbed snacks from the branches of the silver trees that sprouted up here and there, or danced in time to the beat of the music. If this were a normal date, Elle thought, she and Dex might dance together. What would it feel like to have his hand slide around her waist and pull her closer? Her face warmed, and she gave herself a mental smack over the head for allowing such a silly thought to cross her mind. She hardly knew Dex, and here she was daydreaming about him because he was the first guy she happened to spend any amount of time with. She had far more important things to focus on, like vampires, and getting answers about her mom, and not dying tonight. She and Dex pushed their way through the crowd and onto a wooden deck that spanned the length of the house. The party continued out here, with people laughing and chatting or reclining on loungers. Below the deck was a rectangular swimming pool with a cascading water feature at one end, and beyond that, a gloriously untamed garden of tangled bushes and glowing neon flowers and meandering streams. Elle leaned against the railing and stared into the twisted mass. I didn't expect that, she said to Dex with a smile. The house is so clean. Straight lines and hard angles and square spaces. And then you get that beautiful overgrown forest down there.
Yeah, I've never actually met her in person, but from everything I've heard, that's the real Gisella down there. Wild and vibrant. I'm pretty sure someone else picked the house for her.
Elle nodded slowly. I suppose when you have so many houses, it doesn't really matter if they don't all reflect your personal style.
I suppose not.
Dex turned and leaned his back against the railing.
Okay, that must be him on one of the loungers,
he said quietly.
He's the only vampire I can see sitting with a Fey woman.
Yes, Elle answered, not looking around. I noticed him when we walked out here. He looked up at me briefly, and I think his expression changed a little, but it was hard to tell.
Yeah, I can't say for certain if he was one of the vamps at the fairground the other night. There was too much going on. I didn't get a close look at all of them.
Me either, Elle said. For obvious reasons.
Okay, I'm going to get us some drinks.
Dex pushed away from the railing.
Or pretend to, at least.
he added in a lower voice.
If he comes over here and speaks to you, just go along with it. He might want you to follow him somewhere more secluded.
Which I should also go along with, right? So we can get him somewhere quieter before you guys try to catch him?
Yes, Xander, Ollie, and I will be paying close attention to you, so don't worry. We'll all be close behind, ready to act.
Elle glanced over to her left and spotted Xander laughing with a woman who could have been human or shifter. It was impossible to tell without getting closer and shining a light in her eyes, which was considered rude. Paying close attention, huh? Elle asked. Looks like Xander's paying much closer attention to that woman over there than he is to us. Dex chuckled.
Don't worry. He's not nearly as distracted as he seems. I trust him with my life.
Elle caught his arm before he could walk away. What if you don't get the answers you're looking for? She asked quietly. He might refuse to tell you anything.
There are charms the police use to get the truth out of people.
And you know these charms? Dex grinned.
I know a lot of things I probably shouldn't know.
He walked away, leaving Elle to lean idly against the railing and try her best to look lonely and in need of a companion. Since she generally tried to do the complete opposite, this wasn't an act she had much experience with. Either she was doing a terrible job, or the vampire genuinely wasn't interested in her. Or he'd decided it wasn't the right time for him to act. He didn't move an inch from his comfortable spot on the lounger with the Fey woman nestled against him. Eventually, Dex returned and handed Elle a glass of champagne. So you weren't just pretending, she said as she took the drink.
Well, I watched for a while, but our vamp friend showed no sign of moving. I figured I may as well grab some drinks from the waiter I almost bumped into on my way back to you.
Thanks. Elle took a sip and savored the sweet bubbles dancing across her tongue. She never got the chance to properly enjoy champagne while at home. Salvia only ever gave her a glass during pretend family dinners while entertaining a mark, which usually meant Elle was about to steal someone's memories. Nothing tasted good when she knew that was coming.
We'll just have to be patient,
Dex said.
And maybe walk around a little more. If this vampire isn't the right one, then somebody else at this party probably is.
Elle turned her head to look at Dex. Why do you care so much about all of this? The whole human abduction thing? I mean, we're not your own race. Why get so involved? He frowned.
It's the right thing to do. Isn't that enough?
So you don't have any other agenda? He opened his mouth, appeared to choke on something, then thumped his fist against his chest as he recovered. Elle straightened, unsure if she should do something to help him. Are you okay?
Yes,
He cleared his throat.
That was weird. I forgot I made an oath not to lie to you.
Oh. The implication of his words settled over her. I see.
Look, I don't want to lie,
he added quickly.
I don't mind admitting I have another agenda. It's just that it's kind of personal. It seemed easier to say no.
Oh, okay. Elle nodded. That's fine, don't worry. You don't have to explain anything. It really doesn't matter to me what your motives are. You're trying to help humans, and that's great. And I mean, there are things in my life I'd prefer not to talk about, so I completely—
No, it's okay,
Dex said.
I don't mind.
It's fine, really, she insisted. We don't have to get personal. He hesitated, his mouth half open. Something shifted in his expression. Something— Was he hurt by what she'd said?
Right. Of course.
He looked away, leaving Elle with the distinct impression she'd just done something wrong. But if she'd let him talk about whatever this personal issue was, then he might have expected her to reciprocate, and she couldn't do that. She told him about her parents, but that was enough. He didn't need to know what a messed-up home situation she had now. You suggested we walk around a bit more?" she said.
"Oh, yes."
He smiled at her, and it seemed the awkward moment may have passed.
"If there are other vampires around, it'll give them a chance to see you, and hopefully some of them are Allegiant vampires."
"Good idea." Elle took another sip of her champagne before moving away from the deck railing. She and Dex returned to the inside of the home and made their way slowly through the crowd. "Do you mind if I look for a bathroom quickly?" she asked after another few minutes, her voice raised over the music.
"Sure. Want me to hold that?"
He nodded toward her drink. "Thanks."
"And don't worry about anyone following you,"
he added.
"I'll keep an eye on things."
Elle made her way between the partygoers and around the silver trees with endlessly replenishing snacks until she noticed a passageway leading off the entrance hall. Moving closer, she spotted a closed door a few feet into the passageway and 3 women, all Fae, waiting outside. "Is this the queue for the bathroom?" she asked as she reached the women. One looked over her shoulder at Elle. Yes, I feel like I've been waiting forever." She turned away and slumped against the wall, her shoulder rubbing the edge of a canvas painting that was probably worth millions. Footsteps stopped behind Elle. Someone sighed and said, "And the bathroom on the other side of the hallway is busy too. I'm going to find one upstairs. Want to come?" "Yeah, okay," Elle answered, realizing only as she turned that the woman behind her was a vampire. Fear shot through her, and she almost declined the woman's offer, but she was supposed to let someone attempt to catch her, not try to avoid it. Hoping she hadn't paused long enough for it to be noticeable, she followed the woman, her eyes scanning the crowd for Dex. She found his gaze, inclined her head in the smallest of nods toward the woman, and looked away. She knew he would follow. She increased her pace and reached the woman's side as the 2 of them made their way through the crowd toward the stairs. Elle snuck a sideways glance at the woman. Smooth, milky skin, hair so dark it was almost black, a serene expression on her face, but it was impossible to tell whether she meant Elle any harm. She was about to look away when she noticed a gold letter A hanging from a chain around the woman's neck. "What does the A stand for?" she asked. The thought that it might stand for Allegiant flashed through her mind, but that was far too obvious. "Alyssa," the woman said as they reached the stairs. She didn't ask for Elle's name, which Elle figured was probably because she already knew it. "Are these parties always so crowded?" Elle asked. "Oh, I haven't been before. I came with someone. Well, followed someone, if we're going to get technical," she added. Followed someone, huh? Elle thought. She almost asked if that someone was her. "How'd you get past security if you weren't with someone on the list?" "Slipped in as part of a larger crowd. It wasn't that hard." "Oh, wow, that is the most hideous piece of art I've ever seen." As they reached the top of the stairs, Alyssa stopped in front of a sculpture of a giant wrinkled thumb with an amateurish smiley face drawn onto the cracked ridge nail. "I sure hope Gisela Monroe didn't choose this herself." "Probably not," Elle said, thinking of the bright splashes of color in the tangled garden below. "Don't people in positions like hers pay someone else to fill their homes with expensive and completely unnecessary stuff?" Alyssa gave Elle the kind of genuine smile that made her think the 2 of them could have been friends if Alyssa wasn't about to abduct her. "You're right. That is how it works." Elle looked past the giant thumb and noticed a few other people milling around. If Alyssa was going to attempt something without an audience, she would have to lead Elle somewhere else in order to do it. "That looks like a bathroom through there," Elle said, pointing to an open door. "Do you want to go first?" "That's okay. You go." Elle took a hesitant step forward, still watching Alyssa. Was it possible she'd got this all wrong and Alyssa had nothing to do with the Allegiant? "Everything okay?" Alyssa asked, a small frown creasing her brow. Yes, sorry, I just thought I saw someone I recognized. Oh, okay. Alyssa flashed a wide smile, which froze a moment later as her gaze flicked past Elle, then bounced back to her. The smile vanished. You need to get out of here. Immediately. Elle's heart skipped a beat. Why? Because someone's here for you. Elle paused. Was this part of the vampire's plan to get hold of her, or was Alyssa genuinely trying to help? Seriously, you need to leave. Alyssa grabbed Elle's arm and pulled her in the opposite direction. Elle's instinct was to fight her off, but she managed to remain compliant. She knew Dex or one of the others would be watching, ready to pull her out of harm's way when the moment was right. You're one of them, she said as Alyssa dragged her into a bedroom. I don't know what you're talking about, Alyssa answered. She slammed the door shut, locked it, and pushed a dresser in front of the door as if it weighed no more than a flimsy chair. She then tugged Elle toward the window. Do you know about my mother? What? Alyssa flashed a confused look in Elle's direction. The last vampire who dragged me out of a bar said something about my mother. I want to know. Whoa, hang on. You're pushing me out of a window? We're jumping, Alyssa said. A second later, Elle found herself draped over Alyssa's shoulder, and as something crashed against the door behind them, Alyssa jumped. Elle screeched as the wall flashed past her. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact of hitting the ground, but the jolt as Alyssa landed wasn't nearly as bad as Elle expected. Show off, she gasped, struggling for breath. I'm going to run now, Alyssa said. Please don't throw up on me. Tell me about my mother. I don't know. Hey! Someone landed behind Alyssa, and Elle looked up in time to see the face of a vampire she recognized. His hands flashed forward, and then Alyssa was falling, taking Elle down with her. Don't do this, Azriel! Alyssa shouted. Azriel. So that was his name. The vampire with the barcode tattoo and the answers about Elle's mother. Something gripped her waist. She was tugged upward, and the night whirled around her. Don't fight, she reminded herself. But her self-preservation instinct was too deeply ingrained, and before she knew it, she'd shoved her elbow in his face and kicked backward as hard as she could. And that's why I'm wearing chunky boots. The random thought flashed through her mind as Azriel grunted in her ear. But his grip on her remained just as tight. With a burst of speed, he began running. The garden blurred past. Then, with a flash of golden sparks and dust, everything slowed. The next thing Elle knew, she was tumbling across the grass. She came to a halt on her back, but the stars seemed to bounce around in the sky far above her. Are you okay? Dex asked, his face in front of hers. The world spun around as he lifted her to her feet. Yeah, just everything's spinning. She stumbled sideways and blinked repeatedly. A little help over here, Ollie shouted. Dex raced away as Elle caught herself against a tree. Don't throw up and don't fall over, she told herself as she blinked rapidly and breathed deeply. As the world slowly settled, she squinted at the golden glow not too far away and tried to figure out what was going on. A loop of magic was wrapped tightly around Azriel, and 3 golden glowing ropes were attached to the loop. Dex, Xander, and Ollie each hung onto the end of one of these ropes, and all 3 seemed to be struggling to keep Azriel from writhing wildly about. Just hit him with enough to make him pass out, Xander shouted. I'm trying, Dex yelled back, throwing one hand out and releasing a flash of magic. If you could get him to stop moving, that would be great. With a fierce cry and a powerful tug on the rope, Dex heaved Azriel toward him and slammed his outspread hand into the vampire's chest. Gold dust radiated away from the point of contact. Azriel staggered backward before falling to his knees. In a flash of motion too fast for Elle to shout a warning, someone raced up behind Dex and leaped onto his back. It was Alyssa, Elle realized. Just minutes ago she'd helped Elle, and now she was attacking Dex. And if she bit him... "No!" Elle said out loud. She ran forward. Ollie and Xander were trying to restrain Azriel, who still hadn't passed out, and no one was helping Dex. So Elle did the only thing she could think of, which turned out to be the exact same thing Alyssa had done. Elle jumped onto the vampire woman's back and tried to wrench her away from Dex. "What the hell?" Alyssa shouted. She thrust backward with one elbow, but her angle was wrong, and Elle only wrapped her arms tighter around Alyssa's neck. "Get off!" Alyssa hissed. Her grip loosened on Dex. She turned a little, exposing her chest, and a flash of magic, from Xander or Ollie, Elle wasn't sure, sizzled by, catching Alyssa's shoulder. She let go of Dex with a cry and finally managed to dislodge Elle, who landed on her backside on the grass. With a roar, Azriel jerked one shoulder forward and then the other, yanking the two remaining ropes away from Xander and Ollie. Alyssa was by his side in a second, helping him to his feet. He stumbled forward a step or two, then seemed to recover enough to start running. A moment later, he'd taken off with Alyssa, while Dex and the others hurled magic uselessly after the two vampires.
"What the hell?"
Dex gasped.
"How strong was that vamp? Are you okay?"
Xander asked. Elle climbed to her feet. "Did she bite you?" she asked as she ran toward Dex.
"I don't think so."
Dex clutched his neck.
"I don't feel anything. Do you see any blood?"
Elle pulled his hands away from his neck. "No."
"Hey!"
a new voice shouted.
"What now?"
Xander grumbled, looking around.
"Security guards,"
Ollie answered.
"Lots of them." "Definitely time to leave,"
Dex said. They ran through the tangled garden, dodging bushes and trees and couples making out, and eventually curved around the side of the house and came out near the parked vehicles.
"Hurry up,"
Xander shouted, opening one of the back doors of Dex's car before climbing into the front passenger seat. As Dex reached the driver's side, Elle tumbled through the open back door. Ollie threw himself in after her.
"Drive,"
Xander yelled. But the car was already moving. Ollie yanked the back door shut as Dex pulled away with a screech of tires.
"Everyone okay?"
he asked.
"Elle?"
Yes. She pushed her hair out of her eyes as she sat up. "I'm fine."
"Do you think anyone got a good look at us?"
Ollie asked.
"Worried you won't be able to show your pretty face at one of these parties again?"
Xander asked, turning in his seat to face Ollie with a grin.
"You know why I'm worried,"
Ollie said.
"I doubt most of the people at that party are even aware something just happened,"
Dex said.
"And the security guys didn't get close enough to see us. We're fine."
He sped past the security check and turned sharply at the bottom of the driveway. Elle slid across the seat and crashed into Ollie. I'm sorry, she said, then started laughing.
"What?"
Dex asked. She scrambled back to the other side of the car and pulled the seatbelt across her body, still chuckling. Nothing.
"You sure you're okay?"
Ollie asked. Yes. Well, that wasn't strictly true. She'd missed out on her chance to pee, and her bladder was starting to complain. But that wasn't the kind of thing she needed to share with three guys. It's just, I don't know. Is it crazy that part of me thinks that was kind of fun? Dex caught her eye in the rearview mirror. He grinned.
"Only the good kind of crazy."
Chapter 7. Somewhere near the top of a high-rise apartment building in Vale City, Azriel sat at a polished oak table, contemplating his most recent failure. The aches and pains from his earlier encounter with the three Fae had just about faded, but his wounded pride remained. On the other side of the table, a blond man poured himself a drink. He could have been about 30 years old, or he could have been 300. He could have been older or younger than Azriel. It was impossible to tell with vampires, and it didn't matter. Age was simply a number. Without offering Azriel the drink, The man dragged a chair out from beneath the table, letting it scrape slowly across the floor. He sat. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass before placing it on the table.
I'm disappointed, Azriel. You came highly recommended, but I'm starting to doubt your abilities. After Leroy spotted her at that party and called you, I figured it was a done deal. What happened?
Azriel folded his arms and took a calming breath as he stared out of the apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows at the glimmering city lights. He didn't appreciate being told off like a child, but it wouldn't do to lose his temper.
It was a setup, Lev. Somebody wanted to catch me. I see. Well, aren't you special?
Azriel's hands clenched into fists beneath his arms.
Not particularly. I assume somebody wants answers, and they'll take them from whoever they can get hold of. Well, if it really was a setup, and who knows whether you're simply being paranoid, then I can't send you out again. This girl and her friends will recognize you. The only way we'll make this work is if I send someone they haven't seen before.
Like me? The voice came from the shadowed doorway leading to the bedrooms. Azriel knew without having to look that it was Nick, Lev's son. He'd met Nick several times when he first joined the Allegiant.
Perhaps,
Lev said as Nick walked forward. With their matching white blonde hair, red eyes, and unlined faces, they could have been brothers instead of father and son.
Nick,
Azriel said, inclining his head in a brief nod of greeting.
How's it going being experimented on?
Nick rolled his shoulders.
To be honest, I've never felt better. Younger, more powerful. I wonder if this is what those insufferable fae feel like all the time.
Azriel hated to show an interest, but he couldn't hide his curiosity.
So, it's working. Feels like it.
Azriel looked at Lev.
If you figured out how to do it, then why are we hunting down this girl? I don't know the complete method,
Lev said.
It's possible I'm leaving something out, something important. That's why I need her. And I'd have her by now if you hadn't failed 3 times. I did find her,
Azriel reminded him quietly.
True, that is something, but not enough. She's currently still out there.
Azriel decided not to argue. He was certain he could catch the girl if given another chance, but if Lev had other plans, that was fine.
Well, if you have no further use for me...
Azriel placed his palms on the table and pushed himself up.
Then my work here is done.
He stepped around the chair and pushed it back into place beneath the table. He would have preferred to slam it, perhaps cracking both the table and the chair, but he didn't need these people knowing they could so easily get under his skin.
Don't think you're off the hook,
Lev said. He raised his glass to his lips and tipped the contents down his throat. Ice blocks clinked as he lowered the glass to the table.
You'll be required here tomorrow night for another meeting. Regarding what? Azriel, don't tell me you've forgotten the meaning of the word Allegiant.
Azriel narrowed his eyes.
Of course I haven't forgotten. My allegiance,
he bit the word out angrily,
is to the true king. Then it doesn't matter what tomorrow's meeting is about. If it's to serve your true king, you'll do whatever's required of you.
Azriel let out a long breath.
Of course.
Lev cocked his head, his gaze sliding down and settling somewhere near the collar of Azriel's shirt.
You never did tell me about that tattoo of yours, and I don't intend to.
With that, Azriel strode to the door, yanked it open, and left the apartment. He allowed himself the duration of the elevator ride to wallow in the dark memories that had surfaced at Lev's mention of the tattoo, but when the door slid open, he banished them. Out on the street, He was about to run when a familiar voice called his name. He turned back to face Alyssa, his hands fisting at his sides.
How dare you get between me and that girl? Don't you know who she is? I was so close. I almost—
Of course I know who she is, Alyssa answered. That's why I had to stop you.
You don't know what you've cost us.
Alyssa's red eyes glinted in the light cast by the street lamps. Az, why are you still involved with these people? Their agenda it's insane.
You know why. And as my sister, you're supposed to be on my side.
I don't have to be on your side when you're doing the wrong thing.
Maybe you're the one who's wrong.
It was a stupid, petty thing to say, and it reminded him of a time many years ago when the two of them were children. I'm not, she said, and as Azriel turned to race away, part of him feared she might be right. Chapter 8. They must suspect by now that it was a setup, Elle whispered into her phone. I mean, you and the others were right there at the correct moment, ready to catch him. They can't possibly think that was a coincidence. It was Saturday morning, and after gathering all the breakfast dishes and cleaning the kitchen, she'd hurried up to the attic to answer a call she was expecting from Dex. They tried not to speak in specifics. No names or places. It wasn't something Elle would have considered, but Dex was worried someone might be listening.
Yes,
he said.
I'm sure they must. Wait, why are you whispering?
I'm not whispering, she whispered. Just talking quietly. I don't want to disturb my family.
Oh, okay. Anyway, yes,
he continued.
They probably suspect something, but if they want you badly enough, that won't stop them from trying again. There'll probably just be more of them next time.
Which means you need more people on your side as well. Dex sighed.
That isn't possible. It's just the three of us. Nobody else knows about this.
What if you tell? She stopped, reminding herself about the no specifics rule. We need to talk in person again, she said.
Ow!
Meredith's screech reached all the way up the stairs and through the closed attic door. I'm sorry, I have to go, Elle said.
Okay, I'll text you about meeting up somewhere.
Elle switched her phone off and shoved it beneath her mattress before hurrying downstairs. She rushed into Meredith's bedroom, where Meredith was standing in front of her mirror in a plain cream-colored dress. Sienna sat on the bed with a tablet in her hands. Is everything okay? Elle asked. Without looking around at her, Meredith waved toward a wet patch on the carpet.
There's a mess over there.
Oh, I see. Meredith met Elle's gaze in the mirror and narrowed her eyes.
So you need to clean it up.
Yes, of course. What is it?
Jeez, it's just water. The wind blew the curtain and knocked my glass over or something. Why does it matter what it is?
I'll help you, Sienna said before Elle could get herself into trouble by explaining that it was useful to know whether soap was needed or not. Sienna scooted to the edge of the bed. It'll be quick. I've perfected the sponge charm with—
Don't,
Meredith snapped, spinning around and glaring at Sienna.
It's Elle's job to clean. Don't waste your magic.
It's fine, Elle said to Sienna. She hurried to the kitchen and returned with a small towel. Where's the dressmaker? She asked as she crouched down and pressed the towel against the carpet. I thought I heard someone arrive a few minutes ago.
Oh my gosh, you were so behind the times, Meredith said. They don't send actual people anymore to do measurements and quotes and things.
Well, some of them do, Sienna corrected. The ones who cost a lot. The ones who work for recognizable designer names. But we can barely afford the fee to get a quote from people like that, let alone an actual custom-made dress.
Yes, okay, but the people who send the magic sample dresses are just as good. Meredith said. And besides, all you're getting is a ready-made store-bought dress, so you don't get to judge my dressmakers and their process. Whatever, said Sienna with a shrug. Is that a magic sample dress? Elle asked, nodding at the dress Meredith was wearing. She refolded the towel and pressed it into the carpet again. Yes, and there's this book that comes with it. Meredith moved to her desk and lifted a large hardcover book into her arms. You can select different styles. She turned several pages before touching something, and her dress changed instantly from a simple sleeveless shift dress to a ball gown with a tight bodice and a huge poofy skirt. Ooh, cool, right? And then the second half of the book has all these fabric samples. She flipped to where the paper pages became fabric pages of different colors. She touched one, and the stiff cream fabric became a softer, glittery purple. That's actually really pretty, Sienna said begrudgingly. Yeah. So then I send my style choice and fabric choice back to the dressmaker, and the dress itself records all my measurements, and then the dressmaker sends a quote for how much the dress will cost. Easy peasy. That is quite cool, Elle admitted. The wet section of the carpet was now a barely visible damp patch, so she stood and balled the towel in her hands. It is. I guess you can stay if you want, Meredith added imperiously. I doubt you'll ever get to experience something like this yourself. You may as well watch me. How generous of you, Elle thought. She looked at Sienna, who didn't bother hiding her rolling eyes. Suppressing a smile, Elle said, Where's your mom? I thought she'd want to be here for this. She was supposed to be back by now, Meredith said, but I guess her coffee date went too long or something. She was meeting Mrs. What's-Her-Face with the giant mole. You know how she can talk forever. Yes, Elle said with a nod, though she had no idea who Meredith was talking about. Is this everything? Sienna asked, looking up from Meredith's tablet. All the articles you have about the prince? 'Cause this is a lot. I don't know when you're going to have the time to read it all before the ball. No, that's just one of 3 folders. And what do you mean I won't have time? I've read most of it already. Oh, but don't you have college courses you're supposed to be doing tons of reading for? Yes, but obviously this is more important. What do you think of this style and color? Meredith turned to the right and then the left, admiring her form-fitting ruby dress from all angles. Aside from a few small pieces of opaque fabric that covered the important bits, it was made mainly from sheer lace. Too sexy, Sienna said immediately. No such thing, Meredith answered. Yes, there is. You don't want to look like you're wearing lingerie. Don't I? No, Sienna and Elle said at the same time. But I want to grab his attention. This might be the best way. Elle bit her lip. She and Sienna needed to prevent Meredith from grabbing the prince's attention, but it was going to be difficult if she insisted on walking into the palace wearing little more than underwear. Why don't you ask Mom when she gets home? Sienna suggested. Obviously, I'm going to ask Mom as well. Her opinion is way more important than yours. Sienna sighed and returned her attention to the tablet. Elle crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed. So you've memorized all this random stuff? Sienna asked. His favorite color and hobbies and... She brought the tablet closer to her face. Is there seriously an article about how he likes his eggs cooked? Yes, medium poached. There are articles about everything, Sienna. Mostly from the past 2 years. Ever since Prince Remy died and everyone started talking about Prince Chevalier instead. But one of my other folders has all the articles I could find from when he was younger. Elle leaned back on her hands and watched Sienna swiping through articles and photos. She remembered when the older prince had died.
There'd been a huge show of mourning, but it wasn't long before all the gossip turned to Prince Chevalier, the new heir to the throne.
"He's only 23,
Sienna said, zooming in on some smaller text.
Why is his father so desperate for him to marry? Surely he's still got time."
No idea. Meredith tapped her book and changed her dress style yet again.
"It's probably some royal thing that we don't know about. Thou shalt be married by age 24 or something." Seriously, that's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard come out of your mouth, and you say a lot of stupid. Sienna, if you're going to be mean, then get out of my room. Sorry.
Sienna swiped the screen again.
Why aren't there any recent photos of him? I can't find anything when he's more than 10 years old.
Quite a cute 10-year-old, though, Elle added, leaning forward to get a look at the fair-haired boy.
Oh my gosh, don't you ever pay attention to any of the gossip?
Meredith asked.
No,
Sienna said.
It's because of his illness. It's bad luck to photograph Fae who are seriously ill. It, condemns them to eternal sickness.
Elle met Sienna's gaze. Sienna rolled her eyes again, and Elle bit her lip to keep from laughing. Did Meredith honestly believe all the stupid things she said?
That's the main reason all my friends are so excited to go to this ball,
Meredith continued, swaying her hips and swishing her many-layered tulle skirt from side to side.
None of them think they'll actually be chosen. They just want to see what Prince Chevalier looks like. I, however, don't actually care. I just want to be a princess and live in a palace.
Sienna opened her mouth, but the sound of the front door banging shut interrupted whatever she was going to say. Must be your mom, Elle said, standing up. Salvia wouldn't be happy if she caught Elle lazing about on Meredith's bed. It would be better if she thought Elle was patiently waiting to serve one or both of her stepsisters.
"We're in here!"
Meredith shouted.
"Come and see the magic sample dress they sent over from Darcy's Delightful Dresses."
In a minute, Salvia called back. Her footsteps moved past Meredith's bedroom to her own. Several moments of quiet followed before those footsteps rushed back out. Salvia raced into Meredith's room and stopped at the sight of Elle. Fury burned in her eyes. Did you take it? Instinctively, Elle raised her hands. No, what? I didn't take anything.
Mom, what are you talking about?
Sienna asked. The wish is gone.
What?
The wish. I picked it up from Apollo's yesterday afternoon, along with the authentication certificate. They offered me a price, and I told them I'd need to think about it. Sometime between last night and right now, the wish has gone missing from my bedroom. Her eyes returned to Elle. And since there's no sign of a break-in... I wouldn't dare, Elle said, her hands still raised in surrender. She almost added that Salvia could search the attic if she wanted to, but that would be a bad idea. She might find Elle's hidden collection of essence.
It was me,
Meredith said quietly. What? Salvia's gaze snapped toward her favorite daughter. With her eyes fixed on the floor, Meredith said,
You told me last night that the wish was real and they offered a decent amount of money for it. I knew you'd probably want to sell it instead of letting me use it, so I took it and made a wish.
You used it? Salvia demanded. Meredith finally raised her eyes and met her mother's gaze. She set her jaw. I did. Salvia took in a deep, shuddering breath. What exactly did you wish for?
When the prince sees me, he'll want to marry me.
That's what you said. Those are the exact words you used?
Pretty much. I said, I wish that when Prince Chevalier sees me, he'll want to marry me.
Salvia sighed.
What?
Meredith asked,
Don't you think that's good enough?
I suppose it might work, Salvia said. If a first-tier wish is strong enough to grant something like that.
Meredith folded her arms.
What were you going to suggest then?
I was thinking that perhaps we scour the entire catalog of wishes and find something we know would work for a first-tier wish, and somehow use it to our advantage.
That's ridiculous, Mom. The catalog is ginormous. There aren't enough hours between now and the ball to read every entry in the first-tier wish section.
That's probably true, Sienna murmured.
I didn't ask you, Salvia snapped. And what are you doing in here? She asked Elle.
I was cleaning. Elle pointed to the faint patch on the carpet. Meredith asked me to.
Well, you can both leave now. Meredith and I have important work to do. Give me that, she added, snatching the book from Meredith's hands. Let's see if we can make this work.
Elle left the room without having to be told twice. Sienna's quiet footsteps followed closely behind her.
This is a disaster,
Sienna whispered as they reached the kitchen.
The wish thing? What if it works? I don't want to be stuck in a palace for the rest of my life with a mother who abuses me. And I know she'll have plenty of other things to keep her busy while living in a palace, but she'll still be able to hurt us. I know she will.
I know. Elle pushed her hand through her hair. I mean, you'll probably still have enough freedom that you could run away at some point. But loads of people will recognize you by then. It'll be so much harder.
And you?
Sienna shook her head.
I don't think the king treats slaves very well.
I'll probably be chained up like an animal. It'll be impossible to earn more essence and buy a wish. Sienna pressed her hands over her face. When she lowered them, her eyes were red and rimmed with tears.
Okay, so what do we do? Meredith's made this stupid wish now. We can't undo that.
You just have to make sure the prince doesn't see her. If he does, the wish might work.
It's going to be almost impossible to keep her away from him.
I know, but you'll have to do whatever it takes. Even if she hates you for it. Even if Salvia sees you and ends up punishing me because of your actions.
Elle?
Elle gripped Sienna's shoulders and stared determinedly into her eyes. You can do this. Chapter 9. That evening, Elle descended the stairs leading from the side of Penryn Pier down to the beach and stepped onto the sand. The outdoor bar Dex had asked her to meet at was a little further along the beach, its tables and chairs arranged on the sand beneath a rickety structure fashioned from bamboo poles and palm fronds. Despite its rundown appearance, it was clearly popular, as were the other establishments lined up along this part of the beach. It was comforting to know there were so many people around, but Elle still found herself walking faster than necessary, aware of the possibility of lurking vampires.
Hey.
Dex waved her over as she neared the bar. He sat at a small table, and she slipped into the chair opposite his.
I was hoping you'd be able to meet earlier in the day,
he added. I'm sorry, I had family obligations. She removed her canvas bag from her shoulder and dumped it on her lap. Why? Do you have other plans tonight?
No, it's just that it's safer to meet during the day. There could be vampires out here tonight. Allegiant vampires.
He shifted forward in his seat and leaned his elbows on the table. His arresting silver blue eyes didn't move from her face, but she was definitely getting better at pretending they had no effect on her breath or her pulse. There could be, she said as she tucked her hair behind one ear. And that would be a good thing, remember? Then we wouldn't need to make another plan to try and lure them in. He paused, then nodded.
Right, yes, of course.
But we don't know if that will happen, so we should make a new plan just in case.
Do you have a suggestion?
He asked.
There was something you wanted to say on the phone.
Well, I think we might need to be more direct about this. Rather than going out at night and hoping the right vampires show up, I could contact them and ask to meet. I still have the number for the vampire who first abducted me, the one who tried again last night. So what if I just send him a message and say I want to meet at a certain time and place? Obviously, he'll be suspicious, but I can say that I realize he wants me for some reason, and that I'll agree to help him if he gives me answers about my mother.
Your mother?
Yes, remember I told you I thought he said something about her?
Yes.
Dex frowned.
But even if you say you want answers, he'll still suspect it's a trap. So why would he agree to meet?
You said it yourself when we spoke on the phone. If these vampires want me badly enough, then they'll come even if they know it's a trap. Asriel will probably bring a whole load of other vampires with him, which is why you need more backup.
Asriel?
Yes, I heard Alyssa, the other vampire, say his name last night.
Okay, but I don't have more backup.
But the police do. That's the part I was going to say on the phone. Elle shifted forward slightly. You should tell them what we're planning. You said you're going to tell them whatever you manage to find out once you catch a vampire, so why not tell them now? Surely that's the more legal route anyway. I mean, you're not actually authorized to hold people in custody and question them, are you? Dex opened his mouth and choked on whatever he'd been about to say. He cleared his throat and said,
That blood oath we made is getting annoying.
Elle raised her eyebrows. You were about to lie to me?
No. I was going to use the words not exactly instead of the word no, which I guess isn't the complete truth, so the blood oath's magic decided to choke me.
Elle blinked. Now I've forgotten what my question was.
You asked if I'm authorized to hold people in custody and question them. The completely truthful answer is no.
Right. I didn't think so. Which means you should tell the police before this happens. You can call them with an anonymous tip or something. Tell them an attempted abduction is going to take place and there's a chance to catch lots of vampires and finally get to the bottom of this abduction thing. Then they can lie in wait and catch all these vampires instead of you and your friends trying to do it and probably getting yourselves arrested in the process. Dex watched her for several moments. Then the corner of his mouth lifted in a half smile.
Okay, I guess we can do that.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm going to send Asriel a message now. She reached into her bag. It didn't contain much. Just her phone, which Salvia still didn't know about, and a sweater in case the night grew colder. Should I ask him to meet tomorrow night?
Yes, and it doesn't matter what location you suggest, since he'll probably insist on a different one.
Okay. Elle quickly typed a message before lifting the edge of her bag and dropping her phone inside. A barely audible squeak ensued, followed by a rush of motion as a small creature zoomed past her hand and landed on the table. The pixie's delicate wings quivered as she righted her pistachio shell hat. Then she dove off the table and flew away.
Scared of pixies, huh?
Dex asked with a grin. Elle laughed. Completely terrified, clearly. What's your biggest fear?
My father.
Dex said without missing a beat. Then his grin vanished. His eyes widened. Crap, Elle whispered. The blood oath. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for you to...
It's okay.
Dex's face was turning red.
I didn't even think, or I would have tried to make something up, and then the oath would have... Anyway, moving on.
Yes, definitely. So the pixie. I think she lives somewhere in my house because I keep finding her in random places. The pantry, inside a flower pot, under a bed, and every time I shoo her away, she disappears out of a window. But then I end up finding her somewhere else in the house or in my bag. Dex's lips pulled into an almost natural smile.
So you are afraid of pixies?
What? No, not at all.
But you said you shoo her away.
Oh, yes. That's because my stepmother kills pixies when she finds them in the house. Dex raised his eyebrows.
That's quite extreme.
Yes, my stepmother is... extreme. At a loss for what to say next, Elle lapsed into silence. Dex didn't say anything either. It seemed the awkward moment hadn't entirely passed yet. Elle looked around. Allegiant vampires could be here right now, she said in a low voice.
Yeah, they could be.
So, she looked at him. Should we hang out here for a while? Are Ollie and Xander nearby in case you need backup?
Yes. Are you able to stay out for a while longer? I mean, you don't have to get back home yet?
Not just yet. My lift, the police officer, isn't coming back here until 11.
So they're still patrolling your street?
Yes, though I think they might finish up tonight or tomorrow. They certainly seem to be tired of hanging out there. And what about you? You definitely don't have anywhere else you need to be tonight?
Nope, not yet. I'm all yours. I mean, you know.
I know, she said with a smile. This is not a date, she reminded herself firmly. This is not a date. But her grin refused to disappear. Until her phone buzzed in her bag. Her heart climbed into her throat as she reached for the phone and turned it over. Her pulse raced faster as she read the message on the screen.
What did he say?
Dex asked. Elle looked up. He said okay. He'll meet me tomorrow night. Chapter 10. A chill breeze lifted Elle's hair as she waited alone at one end of a bridge in Belgravia. Interestingly, this spot wasn't far from the abandoned fairground where she'd woken up surrounded by vampires. Clearly, they liked to hang out in this area. She wrapped her arms around herself as a winged creature, too big to be a bat, but nowhere near the size of a dragon shifter, swooped overhead and disappeared. Silence descended again. It was easy to believe she was truly alone out here. But Dex, Xander, and Ollie were hiding nearby, and hopefully the police had taken Dex's anonymous tip seriously and weren't too far away either. A blur of movement on the other side of the bridge caught Elle's attention, but when she looked more closely, it was gone. She squinted into the night, her eyes scanning the outline of trees, lampposts, a warehouse in the distance, a manhole cover in the road. Then her breath caught and her heart stumbled over itself at the sight of the shape leaning against the railing at the other end of the bridge. A man. A man who hadn't been there seconds before. He peeled himself away from the shadows and began walking slowly toward Elle. She took a deep breath, clenched her shaking hands into fists, and moved forward. I'll be fine, she told herself with each step. Dex was beneath the bridge. Xander was on the road somewhere ahead of her, and Ollie was behind her. If Azrael grabbed Elle and ran, someone would stop him with magic, no matter which way he chose to go. They were several paces away from one another when she realized the vampire coming toward her wasn't Azrael. The lamplight behind him caught on the edges of his white blonde hair, forming a halo-like glow around his head. Elle stopped. You're not Azrael.
No, my name is Nick.
He took another step toward her, and then another. By the time he stopped, he was close enough that Elle could make out his red eyes through the darkness.
You're Estelle Winter, correct?
Correct. What do you know about my mother?
It doesn't matter what I know. We want to know what you know.
Well, I want to know what Azrael meant when he said my mother tried to hide me from you. Why did she do that? How was she involved with vampires? Nick looked around.
Where are your friends hiding?
What do you mean?
I know they're here.
Where are your friends hiding? Elle countered.
I don't need friends. I can handle this on my own.
I don't believe you. He laughed.
Would you like to see what I can do?
Elle shivered. She wanted to say no, but it wouldn't make a difference, so she kept her mouth shut. Nick slowly raised his hands, palms facing upward. Elle took an instinctive step back. Another few seconds passed before she made sense of what she was seeing. Gold dust. Fairy dust. Falling from his fingers. Not possible, her brain said, pushing back against what her eyes were telling her. Gold light flashed away from him, shoving Elle backward and almost knocking her to the ground. But after several stumbling steps, she caught her balance. Magic rippled off Nick in gold waves, then zapped forward and wrapped around Elle. It tugged her right up against him, and for a moment all she could see was his manic grin.
"I bet you taste delicious,"
he whispered. Then something flashed between them, and a strong wind shoved her to the side. "Run!" came Dex's shout. Elle didn't need to be told twice. A vampire in possession of magic? She was totally out of her league. As she ran away, Xander tore past her in the opposite direction. Thank goodness. Dex might be strong and powerful, but could he take down a vampire who might be even more powerful? She raced off the end of the bridge and onto the road, heading for the empty car that was waiting a little further around the bend for her. She couldn't drive it, but Dex had given her a transportation charm. The car would take her to whatever destination she thought of. But why was it still so quiet out here? Where were all the cops who supposedly wanted to get to the bottom of the abductions? And where were the rest of the vampires she'd been expecting? Was Nick so arrogant that he honestly didn't think he needed? Her thoughts scattered as something slammed into her, knocking her into the bushes alongside the road. "Got you," someone hissed in her ear as pain shot up and down her right side. She saw red eyes, dark hair, but it wasn't Azrael. She kicked with as much strength as she could muster. Her combat boots would have done more damage, but she had jeans and sneakers on tonight, knowing she might have to run and that sneakers would be best. The vampire swore at her and yanked on her hair. "You're dead once we've picked everything out of your brain." He tried to tug her out of the bushes, and then everything became a confusing blur. Shouts, lights flashing beyond the twigs and branches, a magically magnified voice telling someone to surrender, the crack of a gunshot. Elle shrieked and instinctively ducked further down into the bushes. On the other side of her closed eyelids, another light blazed, gold this time, and she feared this vampire was about to use magic on her as well. But the grip on her hair was gone, and when she opened her eyes, she saw the vampire lying motionless a few feet away on the road, and Dex was leaning into the bushes, reaching for her. She grabbed his hand and let him pull her up. They ran in the direction of the car, but a crackling sound and a flicker of light told Elle something was wrong before they'd even rounded the curve in the road.
"Wonderful,"
Dex said, slowing to a halt.
"Somebody set fire to my car."
"The warehouse," Elle said, pointing across the road. "We can hide there, figure out what to do."
"Yeah, okay."
They took off in that direction, and Dex used magic to aid them both in climbing up and over the fence. The main entrance into the warehouse had a protective charm on it, but after running around the side of the building, they found a smaller door that Dex was able to unlock with magic. They shut the door, ran up a ramp and into an office, and only then did Elle allow herself to sag against a wall and catch her breath. "Holy stars," she gasped. "He used magic. Magic, Dex. But he was definitely a vampire, right? I mean, he can't be some sort of hybrid." Dex shook his head.
"Not possible for a vamp."
I know, it's just... How? How could he use magic like the Fae do?"
"I have no idea."
"Maybe it's the result of a wish? There are no rules when it comes to wishes. At least not the kind the Godmother grants."
"I don't know."
Dex began pacing.
"Yes, maybe that's it. I can't think of how else a vampire would have essence in his system."
"Right, because even if they drink Fae blood..."
"They don't get essence."
Dex finished.
"But the Godmother doesn't deal with vamps. Would she really grant one of them a wish that would make him more powerful than he already is?"
"I don't know. If the benefit was great enough to her, then maybe."
"But if it's something else, if there's some other way this vampire got his magic..."
Dex stopped pacing, leaned on the edge of a desk, and faced Elle.
He might not be the only one.
There could be more just like him, Elle whispered.
Fae have always been the most powerful. Vampires have speed and strength, but magic has always given us the edge. But vampires with magic? This would put them at the top. If there are enough of them, Elle, this could change everything.
I know, she said faintly. He rubbed one hand over his face, then exhaled a long, slow breath. His eyes moved over her as he frowned.
I'm sorry, I didn't even ask if you were okay.
He pushed away from the desk and came toward her.
There's blood on your hand.
Oh. Elle looked down. It's just a scratch. I landed in the bushes. I've probably got scratches everywhere. She raised her eyes to his again. What was happening out there? Did the cops come?
Yes. Xander and I got out of the way as quickly as possible. I ran after you, but Xander went looking for Ollie. I should probably...
The squeak of door hinges interrupted Dex. He and Elle both looked in the direction of the door they'd entered through. Dex raised a finger to his lips, then moved to the other side of the office, where a second door stood ajar. He pulled it open and motioned for Elle to follow him. They hurried along a passageway and into a large room with hundreds of boxes lined up on shelves that reached all the way to the ceiling. High windows allowed moonlight to filter in. On one side of the room, a metal staircase led up to a gangway and another door. Dex ascended, his shoes making barely any noise on the stairs, and Elle followed. At the top, they slipped through the door into the next room. Even larger than the one they'd just left, this one was piled high with wooden crates. Elle looked back and saw Dex peeking through the crack of the almost closed door.
It's him. The vampire from the bridge.
What? I thought the cops would have him by now. Dex turned away from the door.
We need to get out of here. If a bunch of Fae cops can't restrain him, I'm pretty sure I can't fight him on my own.
I'm happy to get as far away as possible. Elle turned and faced the room. We just need to find a way out past all these crates. She assumed there must be another door somewhere, but after a hurried examination of the room, darting in and out of all the gaps and makeshift passageways between the towering piles of crates, it turned out they couldn't access any section of the wall.
There's no other way out,
Dex said. Can't you use magic?
I could make a hole in the wall if we move all these crates, which I could also do with magic, but he would definitely hear us.
Elle swung back toward the door as she heard a noise. I think he's on the stairs. What do we...
We have to hide. Just be quiet, and we'll be fine. Maybe he won't even come into this room.
They moved as far away from the door as they could get and squeezed into an impossibly skinny gap between two rows of crates. Elle strained her ears for any hint of Nick, but all she could hear was her thundering heart and her shuddering breath.
You okay?
Dex whispered. Yes, sure. She wasn't, though. Half of her was terrified Nick would find them, and the other half was hyper-aware of every point of contact her body was currently making with Dex's. Shoulder, arm, hand, thigh. She swore she could feel his body heat emanating from him. Then his hand moved a little, his pinky finger wrapped around hers. And if anything could have made her pass out right now, it was this. So ridiculous, she muttered, squeezing her eyes shut.
What?
It's like a scene from a movie, she blurted out in a whisper. The hot guy and the awkward girl end up in a confined space. You can feel the tension between them. Next thing, they're kissing, and that's supposed to make total sense. No, kissing should be the furthest thing from their minds. They're about to be caught by a crazy magical vampire. Why aren't they devising a plan to get out of there alive? Dex let out a sound that was somewhere between a choke and a snort.
There are so many things I want to say right now, I don't even know where to start.
Unless one of them is a brilliant plan for how to get us out of here alive, I'm not interested.
A beat of silence passed before he said,
You think I'm hot.
Oh, come on, you know you're hot.
And you know you're not awkward.
That's definitely debatable.
You're very open all of a sudden.
Yes, well, maybe it's the idea of impending death.
We're not about to die.
You're right. We're probably about to be tortured. Apparently, they want to pick my brain apart and then they're going to kill me. Do you have anything else super helpful you'd like to add?
Yes. What terrible movies have you been watching?
Elle sighed.
Not many, I'll admit, but Sienna always seems to choose.
Dex silenced her with a squeeze of his finger around hers.
He's here,
he whispered into her ear, so quiet she could barely hear him over the pounding of her heart. She sucked in a breath and held it for as long as possible, listening for the sound of footsteps. Eventually, as she was breathing out as slowly and quietly as possible, she heard something. Though she couldn't see anything beyond the crate in front of her face, she could track the quiet sounds as they moved around the room. Nick was searching, looking around every pile of crates, and eventually he would... An irritatingly upbeat melody filled the air, startling Elle so much she was in danger of squeezing Dex's finger right off. The noise stopped, and Nick said,
Yeah? No, but I'm pretty sure she ran in here.
He paused, and when he spoke again, he was closer to Elle and Dex than before.
Are you certain about that? Which side of the warehouse?
He paused again.
Was she with someone? Okay, that could have been her. I'll head out that way.
A sizzling sound and a flickering of gold light suggested Nick was using magic. Then came the sound of crates bumping together. Then there was silence. Elle and Dex waited until at least a minute had passed, and then Dex whispered,
I'm going to look.
He shuffled sideways to the end of the gap and peered out past the crates.
Wait here,
he whispered. He disappeared, and Elle spent the next few moments wondering what she would do if he never came back.
All clear,
he said, startling her as he peered back around the crates. Are you sure?
Yes, he made a hole right through several crates and then the wall. He must have crawled through and jumped down.
Elle squeezed her way out before slumping against a pile of crates. Okay, we're not dead.
Nope. See, I told you.
Dex smiled. Remember the other night at the party when I said this was kind of fun? I was wrong. This is definitely not fun.
Yeah, I think I can agree with you on that.
Okay, so now what? Elle asked.
Now we...
Dex trailed off as a shadow flitted across his face. Elle looked up and around at the windows in between the crate piles, but whatever had cast the shadow was gone. When she looked at Dex again, he was leaning over, his hands pressed against his knees. Dex?
Damn,
he muttered, and then he collapsed onto the floor. Dex! She rushed to his side and knelt down. As she rolled him over onto his back, a gasp escaped her lips. Dark, shadow-like streaks rippled continuously across his skin. Holy stars, she murmured. Dex, can you hear me? She shook him, but he didn't respond. She leaned closer and lifted one of his eyelids, then lurched back in fear when she saw his eye was solid black. What on earth? She reached into her back pocket and pulled out her phone, but it was cracked down the middle and wouldn't turn on. When had that happened? Did she land too hard on something when she was thrown into the bushes? It was all too much of a blur to remember. She searched Dex's pockets and found his phone. After pressing his thumb against the screen to unlock it, she searched for his recent contacts. Xander or Ollie, she muttered. One of them would know what to do. Xander's name was at the top of the call history, and she was about to tap it when she saw Cress's name further down the screen. Suddenly, she realized what must be wrong with Dex. This thing that was happening to him was probably the reason he needed a potion from Cress. Elle hadn't overheard everything they'd said in the greenhouse, but she knew Dex needed that potion badly, and that Cress was worried he wouldn't be okay without it. And Cress was a dragon shifter, which meant she could travel fast. Maybe she could get here faster than Ollie or Xander, since they may have run off after vampires. Without another thought, Elle tapped Cress's name and brought the phone to her ear. With every ring, her chest grew tighter. "Please answer, please answer," she muttered. Finally, the ringing stopped. "Dex," Cress said. "I was going to call. I just found some—" "Dex needs help," Elle blurted out. "Urgently." Chapter 11. Elle had never dreamed she would fly one day. She'd imagined what it might be like, shifting into a dragon and taking to the skies, but at no point had she ever considered she might one day know firsthand what it felt like. Now, as she sat in a small lounge at the back of Apollo's apothecary, while Cress tended to Dex in the adjoining room, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to relive the thrill of swooping through the air. She imagined the chilly night air whipping past her, and the feel of Cress's dragon hide, knobbly but also smooth and slippery, beneath her fingers, and the glittering city rushing beneath her. "Elle?" Elle's eyes jerked open as Cress said her name. Anxiety returned instantly, blotting out the delight that had lifted her spirits at the memory of her first, and probably only, flight. "Is he okay?" she asked, standing as Cress entered the lounge. "He will be." Cress slid her fingers through her purple hair before folding her arms. "Right now, he's still asleep, though I suspect it won't be long before he wakes. He's still much stronger than the darkness trying to eat away at him. And fortunately, I had just finished gathering the final ingredient necessary for his potion when you called." "So, wait, what did you say about darkness eating away at him?" Elle asked. "What's wrong with him?" Cress hesitated, looking over her shoulder into a second lounge where Dex lay on a futon amid a mound of colorful cushions. "It isn't my place to say. He can tell you if he chooses to." Elle nodded slowly. "Okay. Can I sit with him until he wakes?" "Certainly. I'm going to tidy up my workshop. I tend to leave quite a mess when making potions in a hurry." She turned away, then looked back. "Had any luck collecting more essence for that third-tier wish you so desperately want?" Heat gathered in Elle's cheeks at the reminder of her ugly secret, but she was fairly certain by now that Cress wouldn't tell anyone. "I'm working on it." "Good. I hope you're successful." With that, Cress left the room. Elle padded across richly colored rugs toward Dex. Scarves were draped across the windows of the second lounge, while numerous leafy plants placed on shelves and tables around the room provided some relief from the riot of color. Elle perched on the edge of the futon and watched the last of the faint, rippling shadows disappear from Dex's skin. Her eyes traveled down to his hand, and she wondered if she should hold it. She wanted to, but that would be weird, wouldn't it? Holding hands with someone she barely knew? They'd held pinky fingers earlier, but that was only because he'd been trying to comfort her as a vampire who thought she would taste delicious came closer and closer to finding her. Before she could decide whether touching Dex was appropriate or not, he sucked in a deep breath and shifted. His fingers clenched briefly, and then his eyelids squeezed tighter before opening. He blinked a few times, a deep frown forming across his brow. "Oh, hi," Elle said, surprised he'd woken so quickly. Feeling suddenly as if she were sitting way too close to him, she slid backward a little on the futon. "Are you feeling okay?" Instead of answering, Dex looked around. Recognition settled in his gaze.
"Apollo's,"
he murmured. "Yes, Cress brought us here."
She made more of your potion, which I'm guessing is what she gave you now.
Dex pushed himself up so he was sitting instead of lying down.
You didn't run,
he said quietly. What? No, of course I didn't run. Why would I leave you in a state like that?
because, I don't know.
He ran a hand through his hair. His gaze moved around the room, never landing on Elle.
I thought you'd be scared. All those dark shadows on my skin, and my black eyes. I thought you'd want to get far away from me.
Of course I was scared, but I wasn't about to leave you on your own like that. I thought some evil magic entity was attacking you or something. And then I figured out Cress might be able to help. I thought it might be something to do with that potion you were supposed to get from her the other night. So I used your phone to call her. I'm sorry, that was probably a violation of privacy, but I was kind of desperate in the moment. I figured you wouldn't mind.
No, I don't mind. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Is it a curse? Dex shook his head, still not looking at her.
No.
He reached for the glass of water on the low table beside the futon and took several long gulps. He set the glass down. When he made no move to explain further, Elle decided not to ask. He would be forced to tell the truth, and he clearly didn't want to share any more about this mysterious malady. Okay, but you're feeling all right now? He nodded.
I think so. Pretty much back to normal.
What's wrong then? Why won't you look at me? He covered his face with his hands and groaned.
I'm sorry. This just isn't right.
What isn't?
You shouldn't have had to see me that way.
He dropped his hands into his lap and looked toward the ceiling.
I'm supposed to be not helpless.
Elle finally realized what the problem might be, and her lips curved into a wry smile. So it's fine if you save my life, but it's not fine if I save yours. He sighed, his eyes finally settling on her.
Something like that.
She couldn't help laughing. You need to let go of gender stereotypes like that. He gave her a rueful smile.
I know. I'm sorry. And it's not even that. Not really. I don't have a problem with strong women. This is more about me. I just hate how out of control I end up when this thing happens. I didn't want you to see that.
Elle leaned back on one hand. You should try being human sometime. It's good practice for that whole out-of-control thing. When every other race is more powerful than yours, it's a feeling you just have to get used to. His smile stretched a little wider.
You may be human, Elle, but you don't seem like someone who's out of control much.
She groaned. If only you knew. He raised an eyebrow and shrugged.
You could tell me.
Maybe another time, she said, knowing it was a lie. We've had quite a night already.
True. Apparently, it's possible for vampires to acquire magic, but that wasn't shocking enough to keep you from daydreaming about kissing me while we were hiding from said vampire.
Elle's mouth fell open. That is not what happened. I was merely commenting on the difference between the reality of our situation versus the exact same situation if it were in one of those silly movies Sienna likes to watch.
Oh, I see.
Dex nodded.
So you don't want to kiss me?
I didn't say that either. Imaginary flames engulfed her face, and she decided it should be criminal to have eyes as captivating as his. They held on to her, refusing to let her look away. What? She asked, her voice coming out embarrassingly breathless. Stop looking at me like that.
Like what?
He asked with a grin. Just like that? His eyes dipped down toward her lips. He leaned forward, and his hand gently grazed her chin.
Wait,
Oh, I'm sorry.
He leaned back.
I shouldn't have assumed.
No, it's fine. It's just, what if I'm terrible at it? Confusion crossed his face.
Terrible at what?
I mean, Elle buried her burning face in her hands. She couldn't believe she was about to admit this to him.
I've never kissed anyone,
she mumbled.
What was that?
He gently removed her hand from her face, interlacing his fingers with hers. She took a deep breath and stared at the ceiling. I've never kissed anyone. A beat of silence passed. Then,
How?
she looked at him. What do you mean, how?
Well, you're beautiful and funny and interesting, and I can't imagine how no one's
I've just been busy.
too busy to kiss anyone.
Yes, busy with more important things. I haven't had time for boys. I mean men. She rolled her eyes. Whatever, you know what I mean. His fingers tightened a little around hers, and his smile melted something inside her.
Do you have time right now?
I do, she said faintly. With his eyes on her lips again, Dex moved closer. But what if I'm really bad at it? She whispered, and he paused a few inches from her mouth.
If that happens to be the case, I don't mind practicing until you get it right.
Elle smiled and let out a quiet laugh. I guess that wouldn't be so. Bright, hot pain bloomed out of nowhere, searing her right ankle. She jerked back, sucking in a breath against the pain. Stars! She hissed between clenched teeth. No. She reached for her ankle, slipped off the edge of the futon, and landed on the floor.
Elle!
Dex pushed himself forward and crouched on the floor beside her. She gripped her leg just above the pain. Crap, no, she gasped. What's the time?
What? I don't know.
He looked around the room, and his eyes landed on something behind her.
It's midnight. Elle, what's wrong?
She let out a wordless moan as the burning intensified.
What's happening? Tell me what to do.
She shook her head, her hand squeezing tighter around her calf. Dex looked down. He reached for the lower edge of her jeans. No, it's fine. Don't. But she couldn't pull her leg back in time, and before she knew it, he'd pulled her jeans up a few inches.
You're a slave,
he whispered at the sight of the gold chain-shaped tattoo glowing on her skin.
But how? Who did this to you?
She couldn't answer. She couldn't explain. The pain was too intense for her to do anything except try to breathe her way through it. But Dex was looking at her in horror, and she had to get home. That was the only way the agony would end. Somehow, she found the strength to push herself up. She launched toward the door.
Wait, where are you?
Leave me alone, she gasped. He knew the ugly truth now, and there was no going back. No chance at a kiss. No chance at anything more. Not that that was ever a real possibility. She hurried out of the apothecary as fast as possible, half running, half limping. Movement didn't make the pain any worse than it already was, but it was blinding, sickening, as she lurched her way around corners and through alleys, steering away from any main streets. She struggled to keep her balance. She couldn't tell if Dex had tried to follow her. Probably not, because surely he would have caught up to her by now. She told him to leave her alone, and he'd listened. For some reason, that hurt almost as much as the pain of the slave charm. The night seemed to press in on her. The moon grew dimmer. She staggered onward for another minute or two before the agony finally consumed her, and the cobblestones of whatever street she was in rose to meet her face. Chapter 12. Dex cursed the lightheadedness that had sent him reeling when he jumped up and tried to follow Elle. Everything had gone white and then dark. By the time he regained consciousness and found himself staring at the ceiling, he had no idea how many minutes had passed. He should have remembered it always took him a bit of time to recover from an episode. He rushed through the back rooms of Apollo's apothecary. The door Elle must have left through was still open. He ran outside, looked both ways, then chose left. But when he reached an intersection, he saw no sign of her in any direction. He ran back, past the open door, and stopped at the intersection on the other side of Apollo's. But again, there was no indication of which way Elle had gone. Damn it. Dex patted his pockets for his phone, but found nothing. His thoughts tumbled over one another as he ran back inside Apollo's. How could Elle be a slave, and yet she roamed the city freely whenever she wanted? And yet, that wasn't exactly true, he reminded himself. She was always checking the time, and he'd never seen her stay out beyond midnight. And she hadn't wanted him coming to her home to pick her up. In fact, that spot he'd once dropped her off at probably wasn't even her home. He hadn't actually seen her go inside, had he? Back inside the colorful lounge, he found his phone on the table beside the glass of water. He picked it up and immediately saw several missed calls from Xander. He clenched his hand around the device. Phone Elle or phone Xander? Which was more important right now? Leave me alone. That was the last thing Elle said to him. And Xander and Ollie had repeatedly told him not to get too close to her. They would be even more insistent if they knew about her slave status. Then Dex's eyes landed on something on the floor that answered his question for him. Elle's phone, with a single crack running from top to bottom. A light inside him went out as he realized he would never find her, and that was the way it was always going to end. He'd known he shouldn't feel anything for her. He'd known he shouldn't kiss her. But he was stupid and reckless, and fate had been forced to step in and remind him of his place in the world. And hers, it would seem. He swallowed, turned back to his own phone, and tapped the screen to call Xander. Time to move on, he told himself as the dial tone sounded in his ear. Less than a full ring later, Xander answered.
Hey, where are you? I've been trying to... I know, I saw. Are you guys okay? Yeah, you? I'm fine.
He didn't need to go into detail right now about passing out because of the darkness. He would only end up with an earful from Xander about how irresponsible he was to have let that happen.
What happened to you two?
He asked.
Just so happens,
Xander said,
that we found someone useful lurking near the bridge.
Dex's heart rate quickened.
Who? The vamp who first abducted Elle. And you caught him? We did.
Dex's lips pulled into a grin.
Well done. Were there others around? Yeah, cops caught a bunch. We got this one, but the magic vamp got away.
He cursed beneath his breath.
I can't believe I just used the words magic vamp. I know. We have to figure out what's going on here. Where'd you take the vamp? My place. Good. I'll get there as soon as I can.
Chapter 13. Elle woke up to find the ground sliding by beneath her. Not the ground, exactly, but a carpet. The carpet in the entrance hall at home. Another moment passed before she realized she was hanging in the air. She gasped in fright and threw her hands out, expecting to fall, but the floor of her home remained the same distance away from her as it moved by, or rather, as she moved over it. Wonderful, came Salvia's voice from behind her. You're awake. Now you can tell me why you dared to stay out beyond your curfew, and why you made me come all the way out to the other side of the city to find you. The stairs to the attic came into view beneath Elle as she remembered exactly how the slave charm worked. if she wasn't in her room at the required time and the mark of the charm began to burn her skin, Salvia would know. It wouldn't hurt her, of course, not the way it hurt Elle. But it would alert her to the fact that Elle wasn't where she was supposed to be, and Salvia could then use the charm to locate Elle. Salvia must have found her passed out and brought her home, and was now using a levitating charm to get her upstairs. "I was trying to get to the bottom of our vampire problem," Elle explained, "just like we agreed, but I lost track of time." "Not acceptable. And you're pretty useless at dealing with your vampire problem, since all the vampire activity was happening in a completely different part of the city tonight, near that beach in that crummy old area, Belgravia." "Yes, that's where I was before I ended up—"
"Stop lying to me!"
Magic sizzled around Elle, and she found herself tossed forward onto the wooden floorboards of her attic. "I'm not lying," she said as she scrambled up to her feet. Her body ached everywhere, from earlier when a vampire had crashed into her, and then from hitting the road as she'd passed out, and now from landing on the hard floor. But it was nothing compared to the pain Sienna would have to endure if Salvia decided Elle's disobedience tonight was worth a punishment. "I promise I'm not lying. I lured a vampire onto the bridge there, and it turned out he—"
"Perhaps you should be asking her to explain this."
The person who interrupted her was Meredith, and Elle looked around to see that she was sitting on the edge of the bed. And beside her— No. The bottom dropped out of everything, and Elle sank to her knees. It was her box of essence. Her future. Her hope.
"What is that?"
Salvia demanded, stalking past Elle and taking the box from Meredith. She yanked the lid off, and Elle heard a quiet intake of breath. For a moment, no one moved. No one said a word. Then Salvia faced Elle. Elle expected to see anger or outrage in her stepmother's eyes, but all she saw was shock.
"Where did you get this?"
Salvia whispered. Elle didn't answer. What would be the point? Nothing she said now would make a difference. Salvia would take the essence from her, like she'd taken everything else, and that would be the end for Elle.
"Did you steal all these vials of essence? Is that what you've been doing every time you sneak out of this house? What were you planning to do? Buy a wish? Blindside me by wishing for your freedom and simply disappearing?"
Again, Elle said nothing.
"I've tried to be lenient with you. I gave you freedom with barely any restrictions because you were once family to me. You've had more freedom than any other slave in this city. And this is how you thank me. You and Sienna will both be punished for this."
"No, wait," Elle said, pushing herself onto her feet. "Sienna doesn't know anything about this."
"Meredith, leave,"
Salvia said, ignoring Elle's protests.
"And thank you, my love, for searching this attic and revealing the true extent of Elle's betrayal."
"Only a pleasure," Meredith said with a gloating smile. She rose from the bed and sauntered past Elle. For one wild moment, Elle considered tackling her to the floor and striking that smile from her face. But then Meredith was at the door, and the moment had passed, and Elle was as weak as she'd always been in her stepmother's presence. Salvia strode past her with a box of essence vials tucked beneath her arm. "Please don't hurt Sienna," Elle said as self-loathing almost choked her. She could barely stand to beg, but she was willing to do anything to keep Sienna from suffering.
"Sienna is not your problem,"
Salvia snapped, turning in the doorway to face Elle.
"Please,"
Elle said, rushing forward.
"Get back in there,"
Salvia shouted, throwing her hand out. Gold dust flashed, and magic stung Elle's cheek. She gasped in surprise and pain, raising her hand automatically to her cheek.
"You will never be free,"
Salvia hissed.
"The confinement charm will be on here permanently. The only time you'll leave this room is when I require your skill at memory removal.
You won't clean the house. You won't go out on errands. We earned enough from the last con to hire a new maid. Congratulations, my dear Estelle. You've graduated from slave to prisoner." She slammed the door and disappeared, along with every last shred of Elle's hope. Chapter 14. With shaking fingers, Elle traced the various star shapes on the quilted bedspread her mother had made. She didn't know what to do, what to feel. She had always had a plan. She had always had hope, no matter how slim. And now she had nothing. There was a gaping hole in her chest, and she didn't know what to fill it with. She looked up as Salvia's shouts reached her ears from downstairs. Then Sienna's cry. Salvia was probably interrogating Sienna, trying to figure out if she knew anything about Elle's essence collection. Would Sienna give in and tell the truth? Salvia would only hurt her more if she did. As Sienna's cries intensified, Elle squeezed her eyes shut and let her tears tumble over her cheeks. She drew her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, rocking herself back and forth. But she didn't try to block her ears. It was her fault Sienna was being punished, and it didn't seem right to try and escape the terrible sounds. When the shouting, crying, and stomping footsteps eventually faded to silence, Elle unwrapped her arms. She climbed off her bed and went to the window. "Look to the stars," she whispered. It was a line embroidered somewhere on her quilt, but the stars had no answers. They held no hope. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered into the night. She raised her finger to the dusty window. In a way, she had known since the moment she saw her essence box sitting out in the open on her bed that it would come to this. But she'd resisted it for so long that she needed just a little more time to accept that this was now the only way out. She traced a symbol in the dust of her window. A symbol she shouldn't know. Good, law-abiding citizens were supposed to avert their eyes from things like this. But Elle had seen it around the city, spray-painted onto walls and alleys, or scratched onto tree trunks. A curve, almost like an S, with 3 lines and a loop. The symbol of the Godmother. Elle took a step back and stared at the shape. Her voice shook as she whispered, "I need your help, Godmother." Then she waited, her heart pounding, unsure of how long this was supposed to take. When a voice spoke behind her, she almost fell to her knees in fright. She spun around, and there, perched on the edge of her bed, was a woman. Her short, elegantly styled hair was completely white, while her eyes were a deep, rich brown. Her skin, like that of most fae, was flawless, exquisite. "You're the Godmother?" Elle asked, though the question was entirely unnecessary. "Yes, and you're Elle, Estelle Winter." Elle blinked. "You know me?" "We've met before. I never forget an essence." "I'm human," Elle said faintly. "I don't have essence." "Not that kind of essence." She crossed one leg over the other. "I mean that inexplicable quality that makes you, you. Faces change with time. Names can change too. But no one's essence ever changes. It's the sense I get from your spirit, your soul, whatever you want to call it. The part of you that is not physical." "So, wait," Elle shook her head. "When did we meet?" The Godmother's lips curved into a smile. "That is someone else's story, not yours." "But what? That doesn't make sense. If I was there, then it's part of—" "I decide what makes sense, Elle. Don't forget that. Now, let's get down to business. I assume you summoned me because you'd like to wish for something."
Yes." Elle took a steadying breath. "I would like to wish for my freedom."
"I see. Well,
That's fairly straightforward. Okay, that's good. The price, however, is never straightforward. Elle sighed.
I didn't think so.
Come closer, the godmother commanded, and after a moment's pause, Elle stepped forward. Give me your hand.
Why?
Elle asked, at which the godmother merely raised a single perfectly arched eyebrow.
Right, of course,
Elle muttered, reaching her hand out. The godmother took it. Her skin was smooth and cool, but not icy. She closed her eyes, and Elle felt something like a tiny zap of electricity dance along her skin. She waited, holding her breath, until finally the godmother opened her eyes and let go of Elle's hand. Interesting, she said. Very interesting indeed. I would ask what it is you find so interesting, but I know you won't tell me. No, I won't. She smiled. But it seems I do have a use for you after all. Okay. Great. What do I need to do? The godmother tipped her head to the side. How badly do you want your freedom? Elle's eyebrows jumped. Do you have to ask? I mean, I summoned you, didn't I? So I must be pretty desperate. Well, the godmother said, looking somewhat taken aback. I would pretend to be offended, but I have to admit I'm impressed you would dare to say such a thing out loud. Look, I know the price is going to be something I don't want to pay, Elle said, but I'm out of options, and this isn't just about me. My stepsister needs to get away from this abusive household too, but she's too young to be out there on her own. I need my freedom so I can run away and take her with me. That's how badly I want this wish. Your stepsister is more important to you than anyone else. Yes, she's the only true family I have left. Good, the godmother said. Let's talk specifics then, shall we? Yes, Elle answered, steeling herself for whatever was to come. There's a masquerade ball happening soon at the palace. I know. Elle frowned as she wondered what this had to do with anything. If you want your freedom, the godmother said, you will go to this ball. Okay. And you will kill the Fey Prince. This has been City of Wishes, a Cinderella story. Episode 2, The Vampire Trap, written by Rachel Morgan and narrated by Ariel Delisle. The story continues in Episode 3, The Moonlight Masquerade.